Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. South Korean lawmakers have voted to lift martial law just hours after the country's president declared it. NATO accuses Russia of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles, calling Putin's actions reckless. And the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is on the brink of collapse as airstrikes and mortar attacks are fired on either side. Hello to you, welcome to W News. We are going to be talking about what is happening in South Korea very shortly, but first to the Middle East. And the Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah could collapse after both sides have attacked. 10 people were killed in southern Lebanon last night by Israeli forces who struck Hezbollah fighters for so-called hostile activity. It was retaliation for Hezbollah firing at an Israeli army base over what they called repeated violations by Israel. We will bring you more on that very shortly. But first of all, I want to bring you some of the other stories making the headlines today. Joe Biden was in Angola, southern Africa, earlier as the US marked the two countries' shared history in the transatlantic slave trade. The outgoing US president was helped up a step by Angolan President Juan Lourenço during a media appearance. It's thought the visit will be Biden's last foreign trip before he leaves the Oval Office in January. French lawmakers will vote on a no-confidence motion on Wednesday evening, which could topple Michel Barnier's government. If ousted, it would be the first French administration to be forced out in this capacity in over 60 years, while the country also battles a financial crisis. Vietnamese businesswoman Troy My Lan has lost an appeal against her death sentence after being found guilty of bank fraud in April. Over the course of 10 years, Troy My Lan stole a total of $44 billion, taking out loans and cash. Her sentence will be downgraded to life imprisonment if she is able to pay back $9 billion. That's 3/4 of the $12 billion she embezzled. She can also petition the president for amnesty for a chance to spare her life. And the fate of the Elgin marbles remains unknown as British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer visits his Greek counterpart today. Downing Street has confirmed the antiquities, also known as the Parthenon marbles, are not on the agenda. That's despite a disagreement between the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Kyriakos Mitsotakis last year on whether they should return to Athens. Let's return to the Middle East and the Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, which could collapse after both sides attacked. 10 people were killed in southern Lebanon last night by Israeli forces who struck Hezbollah fighters for so-called hostile activity. It was retaliation for Hezbollah firing at an Israeli army base over what they called repeated violations by Israel. For more on this, I'm joined from Jerusalem by journalist Noga Tarnopolsky. Hello to you, Noga. Thanks for talking to me on W News. Looking at what is happening here, how fragile does this ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel appear to be right now? Because I notice the United States are saying that it is largely holding.
Right. It's as fragile as any ceasefire can be during what I would say is a preliminary period when some hands might be a bit loose on the triggers. In this case, we also have this new development, this uprising in Syria, which is the country through which Iran has been sending weapons and armaments to Hezbollah. and where Israel has been bombarding regularly those same, weapons envoys. So I think it's a very hot and volatile area, and these are still the first few days of this ceasefire. In addition, there's the political framework in Israel in which you saw the prime minister today, instead of boasting about his achievement in achieving this ceasefire, he reassured his cabinet, don't worry, the war's not over yet. This is just a temporary ceasefire. So we also have to keep on our eyes and our ears open to these kind of statements, especially before Trump returns to office, I would say.
What have Israeli officials said about these accusations of breaching the terms of this agreement?
Israeli officials, by and large, Netanyahu's ministers are they're a very loud bunch, and they have made some very bombastic statements, even in the past 24 hours, basically saying if this is how Hezbollah is going to behave and they're going to shoot our military bases, we're re-entering Gaza with more weapons blaring, even stronger than before. Even the army yesterday, which is less usual, put out a very belligerent statement, basically saying we're ready to, relaunch this war at any minute and we're ready to go. So the atmosphere, the general atmosphere in the Israeli public sphere is very, very hot to trot. And really, I have to say that the population itself of Israel, the general population, hasn't been told that much about the ceasefire or what it might be achieving for them. And on the other hand, the residents of the north, the evacuated residents of the north, so let's say between 70 and 80,000 people, were explicitly told that they cannot go back, that this is not considered safe yet. And today, Prime Minister Netanyahu held a kind of cabinet meeting, a for-show cabinet meeting in the Galilee, to which neither citizens nor any of the northern mayors or officials were invited. It was really just a photo op. So Israeli officials, let's say, are not really giving this ceasefire much PR, and they're not giving the Israeli people much of a chance to understand what it could mean for them.
I mean, for some people, it looks to an outsider that both Israel and Lebanon are looking for any opportunity to break it. They almost don't want it to hold.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very understandable impression, and there's a lot of basis for that feeling. I would say the Israeli government and Hezbollah, in that case, more than Lebanon, that is almost, strange as it is to say, almost a bystander to this terrible war on its own territory. But the Lebanese South and a lot of the Lebanese political sphere has been taken over by Hezbollah with some violence. And so the war Hezbollah launched on October 8th, 2023 against Israel has happened not on behalf of the Lebanese armed forces, or really, I have to say, on behalf of the Lebanese people, but was Hezbollah attempting to show its solidarity with Hamas that had attacked Israel the day before. And Israel chose at that time almost to ignore Hezbollah. It did evacuate the whole zone, but it ignored it and focused on the south. And those are the political consequences we're seeing today. For the Lebanese people who have almost no voice in this entire situation, it's just an unimaginable tragedy.
And for people on both sides, in northern Israel and for Lebanese people wanting to get back to their homes, have many returned now, or are they largely staying away because they're too scared to go home? And of course, for some people, they don't have a home left.
Right. There are a lot of people who don't have homes left. On the Israeli side, no one has gone home except some people who have allowed themselves to go visit and go see what's left of their home for the first time in 14 months. No one has moved back, mostly because there's nowhere to move back to. There are no schools, there aren't facilities. The government has not budgeted to rebuild this entire piece of land. But in addition, the Israelis have received explicit orders from the military authorities who are in charge of that whole border area not to return home. They're not permitted. They'll be stopped. On the Lebanese side, at least in the first 2 days of this ceasefire, it was a bit trickier. The Lebanese army that is supposed to take over southern Lebanon from Hezbollah and the Israeli army that's still on site both told Lebanese civilians not to return home. Nonetheless, thousands did try to come home. That kind of avalanche of people trying to return home has slowed significantly. Maybe people are starting to obey the orders. Maybe they realize they still have to be afraid. But it has slowed. Nonetheless, on the Lebanese side, there are many more civilians for now than on the Israeli side. And I think we're going to have to just sit tight and see how these 6 weeks pass, and if the parties take advantage of this period of time to negotiate what could be a more enduring truce for the region.
We will, of course, stay across it here on W News. Journalist Noga Tarnopolsky, thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure.
Moving on to Russia now, and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has said Russia's aggression shows no signs of abating as Putin ramps up his rhetoric and reckless actions. Speaking in Brussels today, the NATO chief accused the Russian leader of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles in what he described as an illegal war. It comes as Russia captures 2 more villages in Ukraine and struck energy sites overnight in Ternopil, close to the Polish border. I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent Dasha Chernyshuva. Dasha, good to see you again. NATO foreign ministers, they've been meeting today, and there's been a lot of talk that a peace deal is coming. It's not far away. What is likely to make Putin want to sit round the table?
Well, certainly what Moscow says is that freezing the conflict along the current lines of confrontation is completely out of question. Moscow insists that the goals of its so-called special military operation have to be achieved, and this is demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. So what will make Moscow get to a negotiating table, we understand, is the very idea of Russia being provided with certain security guarantees that Ukraine will not be used as a weapon, as Russia insists it is, against Moscow. So certainly from the Russian perspective, for any plans that are that are being circulated in the Western media at the moment, they are not providing for Russia's concerns. They are not alleviating them. So Moscow insists those are half measures, and Moscow will not allow the Western countries just to give some respite to this conflict. In the meantime, giving Ukraine more arms and rearming the country once again. So from the Russian perspective, what is needed is that Ukraine gets a neutral status, that it is not getting to NATO. And actually what we have seen today also is the discussion of Ukraine actually being provided with the NATO membership. With regard to that, the Kremlin has on Tuesday said very clearly that this will be seen in Moscow as potentially unacceptable and threatening to Russia, because Moscow insists this is countering the very principle of indivisibility of security, when the security of one country is being provided at the expense of the security of another country. And Moscow says that is a non-starter.
Putin has signed off his country's budget, hasn't he, which includes a record amount of spending on defence. Now, can we take that as an indication that he's committed to prolonging this war?
Well, it is certainly an indication that Russia understands that this conflict is going to last for quite some time. And Moscow has from the very beginning been saying that it is ready for that. The whole economy has actually been restructured. And if you look at the Russian economy at the moment, it is, many experts say, functioning based on the defense sector. And Moscow insists that the increase in the military budget was actually necessary. We don't know the full extent of how much the budget on defense, national security, diplomacy and other purposes has been extended, because some of the titles in this budget go under the title of a top secret. So we don't know the exact number. But what we have seen was the very fact that Russia has been increasing its defense budget over the course of the past years, and it is now at the record high. And we understand it is exceeding 6% of the country's GDP, something which is higher than the indicators back in the Cold War. So it is definitely an indication that Moscow is here in that for the long haul. But what Moscow also is saying, that it is just not just the fight with Ukraine, but it is taking so much time, Moscow says, because this conflict has long involved Western countries, and Russia is fighting not just with Ukraine, but also with the entire Western world. And that's why Moscow says it has to have the means to defend itself. And actually, we've heard the Russian president recently saying that Russia has started the serial production of its Oreshnik experimental intermediate weapon. And Moscow insists that it is going to develop even more types of weapons that will be necessary for Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity to be preserved.
Russian drone strikes have been hitting energy infrastructure in the west of Ukraine. What more can you tell us about that? Is he trying to, if you like, just wear people down now?
Well, again, the official position here in Moscow is that Russia is targeting the targets in Ukraine that are one way or another related to the military-industrial complex. So what we have heard from the Russian Ministry of Defense was that in 142 regions and areas of Ukraine, Moscow has hit the energy facilities that have been provided for the military-industrial complex, the infrastructure of the military airfields, and this is what Moscow says it has been doing to demilitarize Ukraine.
Dasha Chernyshuva in Moscow, always appreciate it. Thank you very much. To the US now, and President-elect Donald Trump will make his first foreign visit since winning the election. He'll attend the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on Saturday, but President Joe Biden will not. A sign that global leaders are fast turning the page on the current US president, who only has 6 weeks now left in power. Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Fulfilling a promise to visit sub-Saharan Africa as president, Joe Biden's in Angola, seeking to highlight US commitment to the continent in the face of China's aggressive investment there. But his successor is wasting no time taking the international spotlight. The French president's invitation for Donald Trump to attend the unveiling of the newly restored Notre Dame Cathedral, a signal that Macron is deploying the same tactic of flattery that he used with the US president-elect during his first term. But Trump's return to the world stage has also sparked concern among NATO powers. They fear he may fracture the Western military alliance after saying that he'd tell Russia it could do, quote, whatever the hell they want to member states that don't spend enough on defence. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer stressing the importance of supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia in a speech on Monday.
And let's be clear. The future of freedom in Europe is being decided today. We face a near and present danger, with Russia as an erratic, increasingly desperate aggressor on our continent, marshalling all its resources, along with North Korean troops and Iranian missiles, aiming to kill and to conquer.
Also perhaps an appeal to the incoming US president. Donald Trump is deeply sceptical of US support for Ukraine and has promised to end the war in a day once he takes power. He's certainly not waiting until then to launch his foreign policy, with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau rushing to meet him at his home in Florida after he threatened a trade war with the US's northern neighbour.
It was an excellent conversation.
This, along with his trip to Paris on Saturday, serving to highlight that Donald Trump is the American that foreign leaders want to court, as sitting US President Joe Biden increasingly fades from the international scene. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
To a developing story now, and earlier today, South Korea's president declared emergency martial law, accusing the country's opposition of sympathising with North Korea. During a television briefing, Yoon Suk Yeol said he was taking action to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces. Opposition lawmakers were initially prevented by the military from entering South Korea's parliament, but in the last hour, MPs have voted to lift the martial law declaration. Now, Barack Obama reunited with the ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel last night to promote her memoir, Freedom. The two former leaders, who were both in power between 2009 to 2017, discussed working with one another and praised each other's precision for facts. Our correspondent in Berlin, Trent Murray, has been covering this story for us and joins us now. Hello to you, Trent. Good to see you here on W News. A very friendly atmosphere between these two last night. What was their relationship like back in the day?
Well, at one point, former President Obama said that Angela Merkel was his closest ally. Certainly on the world stage, they were two of the most famous political leaders, really, of the 21st century. And they did strike up a friendship that they spoke about in quite detail last night. We know, of course, this is part of Angela Merkel's sort of small world tour that she's taking, launching her memoir, Freedom. It's been many years in the works. It's finally been released. And certainly, I think the fact that she chose former President Obama to help launch that book in the United States in its English version is a testament to the fact that she really does see him as one of the closest leaders that she worked with during her time. It wasn't always plain sailing, though. There were some difficulties in the relationship. A real low point, you might recall, was when the NSA of the US was caught tapping Angela Merkel's cell phone here in Berlin. That at the time garnered a lot of anger from her towards the White House. She said friends shouldn't spy on their friends.
Trent, what was discussed during the evening then? Because we know Angela has been critical of President-elect Donald Trump in this memoir. Did that come up in the conversation?
No, it didn't, actually. There were three names that were not mentioned at all during that conversation: Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Of course, probably some of those contentious areas that the former Chancellor was hoping to avoid stirring any sort of controversy in the US, just given how difficult things are at the moment there with political rhetoric. But she certainly does talk about some of the challenges she had with former President-elect Trump now during her time in office. She spoke about that awkward encounter where he refused to shake her hand in front of the cameras despite her asking for him. She said at that point she knew that she was going to have to strap in for a difficult relationship between Washington and Berlin. She also said that he really just had what she describes as a property developer's mentality, win or lose. And she said he took that approach even with close allies like Germany. That was certainly her perspective of working with Donald Trump.
Angela Merkel had 4 terms in office, and she's credited for getting Germany and also Europe through the global financial crisis and the euro debt crisis. But she has also been criticised for Germany's dependence on Russian gas and Chinese trade.
Yeah, that's right. And that has garnered some even further criticism here in recent days, with some of her critics saying that the book is sort of full of self-congratulations, as one of her critics here described it, and doesn't make apologies for some of those issues, like the fact that Germany did become very reliant on Russian gas to help power its economy. What she has said in the book is that she made the decisions at the time that she did, thinking they were the best for Germany, but she does admit that she underestimated Vladimir Putin's commitment to wanting to take Ukraine. She did think that there was a diplomatic path through through there, but she says she's now been proven wrong on that. But she also, as you said, spoke about one of the other contentious issues, which is the fact that she let in 1 million refugees during the height of the Syrian crisis. And she said she doesn't regret that at all, because she said it was the necessary decision to take, because she said Germany had to show that it has a heart that was willing to try and help people in their hour of need.
Finally, Trent, there continues to be unrest in Georgia over the decision to shelve plans to join the EU. But Germany is still supporting the country's bid, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. We've had some pretty strong language released from the Chancellery here and the chief government spokesperson saying that Berlin is closely watching what is happening in Georgia, particularly some of those protests in the capital, Tbilisi. And they do say that they support the Georgian people, if indeed they want to remain on that path towards EU membership. We know right now that is looking increasingly challenging, given some of the moves by the government there to back away from the ascendancy path of the EU. But certainly right now the message coming from the EU's biggest member, Germany, is that it does continue to support Georgia joining the EU, if indeed that is the decision that the Georgian people want to take.
Trent Murray in Berlin, thank you. Let's bring you some of the top business news. And Elon Musk's $55 billion pay package from Tesla has been blocked by a US judge for the second time this year. Despite the money being approved by the board and shareholders, the Delaware court has ruled the payment was too excessive. The judge previously argued that board members were too heavily influenced by Musk. Reacting on his platform X, the tech tycoon said that shareholders should control company votes, not judges. Jaguars say they've shown fearless creativity as they unveiled their new concept car, the Type 00, in Miami this week. The vehicle will not officially go on sale, but the manufacturer believes it will epitomise the brand's 3 production models, which will be available to buy in 2026. The recent advertising campaign and the rebranded logo has garnered worldwide attention. To sport, and the president of the FIA has said he's open to introducing a 12th team to Formula One. It comes after the announcement that General Motors has become the 11th team to join, with their Cadillac due to make its debut in 2026. British boxer Daniel Dubois will defend his world heavyweight title when he faces New Zealand's Joseph Parker in Saudi Arabia in February. Dubois defended his IBF belt when he beat Anthony Joshua at London's Wembley Stadium in September. And former Mexican boxing champion Israel Vazquez has died at the age of 46 after being diagnosed with stage 4 sarcoma. Nicknamed Al Magnifico, the news was announced by the WBC president Mauricio Suleiman. To a developing story now, and earlier today, South Korea's president declared emergency martial law, accusing the country's opposition of sympathising with North Korea. During a television briefing, Yoon Suk Yeol said he was taking action to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces. Opposition lawmakers were initially prevented by the military from entering South Korea's parliament, but in the last hour, MPs have voted to lift the martial law declaration. I'm now joined by John Everard, the former British ambassador to North Korea. John, thanks very much for joining me. Do hope you can hear me okay. Let's just get up to date with this, because events have been moving pretty quickly. What has pushed Yoon Suk Yeol to take such serious measures, and how serious is this crisis?
Well, there's 2 questions there. What's pushed him to do it? I think essentially frustration. Yoon Suk Yeol, he was badly hammered in the last parliamentary election in South Korea. He's been running a minority government, and the opposition parties have stymied most of his political agenda. The immediate trigger was the budget, which the opposition was simply voting down. how serious is this? I think basically there are two outcomes. One is that the president has to sign into law the National Assembly vote earlier this evening. Remember, of 190 deputies present, all voted in favour of lifting martial law. In which case his position politically becomes simply untenable and he will have to stand down. Either that or he tries to override the National Assembly, in which case things could get quite ugly. I suspect at that point we would be looking at street demonstrations and possibly even violence, though I very much hope not.
Yeah, I mean, we have already been seeing pictures of those protests. So South Korean MPs, they voted to lift martial law and reverse this decision. It is going to be maintained, say, the South Korean military until it's lifted by the president. Is his role as president now over? Is he done for in light of this?
Possibly. So much depends on what happens in the next few hours. If he accepts the National Assembly resolution and signs into law, then yes, I mean, effectively he's toast. But the big risk is that he tries to face down the National Assembly and ask his military to suppress protests, in which case, I mean, he remains as president, but no longer president of a functioning democracy.
Were you surprised that he did this today? Because it was, for the first time, I understand, since 1979. I mean, it seemed like quite a dramatic move, or in your eyes, was it understandable?
Understandable up to a point, in the sense that everybody knew that President Yoon was getting very frustrated. And early this year, some commentators were speculating on the possibility of his declaring martial law. But essentially, this caught everybody by surprise, including quite evidently all regional governments. The silence out of Pyongyang, out of Beijing, even out of Moscow has been deafening. Yoon blindsided everybody. As you say, the first time this happened since 1979, and in fact, by a cruel coincidence, we're just 9 days off the anniversary of the 1979 coup.
What would martial law have entailed, and was it actually lawful? I mean, one of the things is that the media would have been under very strict control as well.
Yes, that's right. Very strict media control, very strict rules against freedom of assembly, against demonstrations, effectively, rules against the National Assembly. A lot of people are saying that part of the martial law declaration that came out a few hours ago was unconstitutional in any case. Was he legal? The president is allowed to declare emergency national law in certain circumstances in cases of grave emergency. The problem is that how you define a grave emergency is essentially down to the president. So that, strictly speaking, in declaring martial law, he was actually acting constitutionally.
OK. And we saw earlier that the South Korean military even prevented MPs from entering the parliament. They tried removing them and preventing them from voting. Did they actually have the power to do that?
If they're ordered by the president to do so under martial law, then possibly yes. But what struck me was, if you look at the scenes in Parliament, those soldiers really weren't trying very hard. I mean, they could easily have entered the building quickly and simply forced all the deputies out at bayonet point if necessary. They didn't do that. And indeed, when the Speaker of the National Assembly asked the soldiers to withdraw, they did so. I can't believe that the order to withdraw came from the presidential office. It looks as if senior officers had decided to follow the lead of the National Assembly rather than the president. If that's true, then President Yoon has a problem.
Interesting. John Everard, former British ambassador to North Korea, thank you so much for joining me here on W News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. South Korean lawmakers have voted to lift martial law just hours after the country's president declared it. NATO accuses Russia of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles, calling Putin's action reckless. And the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is on the brink of collapse as airstrikes and mortar attacks are fired on either side. That's all from us on W News. Thank you for your company. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. From all of us here, a very good night.
At our Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
In 2018, Maria Butina was convicted of working as an unregistered Russian foreign agent in the US. She was jailed and then deported to Russia. Butina has always denied being a Russian spy, and at the time, President Vladimir Putin said he had never heard of her. Well, she now serves as a parliamentarian in the Russian State Duma and is a supporter of the Russian military offensive in Ukraine. Maria Butina, good to have you on the show. Now, let's start with the latest developments in Ukraine. Following the recent round of escalation and the warnings issued by President Putin, do you fear the world is now closer to nuclear war than at any other point in your lifetime?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't been in other points of our world's life, like the Cuban Missile Crisis or Caribbean Missile Crisis, depends, where you live and how you call it. But I think we're now in a quite low point of the relationships between Russia and the West, and that's put the whole world in the danger.
You know, the numbers of casualties are difficult to calculate, and they're disputed by both sides. But after the 1,000-day milestone was passed, how are the Russian people managing to accept the losses of their sons, and do they clearly know what the sacrifice is for?
They absolutely do. And I was elected from a small region, Kirovsky Oblast, which is located in about 1.5-hour flight from Moscow. And I should tell you that we're all united, and we help to the front lines, and we cry for those who are, lost their lives, sacrificing them for our motherland. But we all understand that this is a necessary thing to do, because we are trying to help to the Russians in their new territories, Russian new territories, that's first. And the second, which I view very, very important, we actually are fighting for survival of Russia and the whole world, because we see that Nazism in a full scale is back, and we have to stop it. We absolutely have to stop it.
There are arguments put forward, though, that the Russian people don't necessarily know the full story because of the control of the media there. How can Russian people make a clear decision if they don't have a full idea of what's going on?
Oh, come on, they have quite a full idea what's going on, because, you can go on Telegram channels and you read a lot of stuff from both sides, and people understand what's going on. And even if little villages, people don't rely on TV anymore that much. Only 50% of Russian population is TV watchers. Most of them actually go on social networking, and they talk to each other. And, you cannot hide the truth. And the truth is that SMO should have been started, because NATO was coming so close to our borders that it would put the whole world in the actual stance of the Third World War. So we were protecting Russian-speaking population, and we absolutely understand how important it is to make a step forward today. So people do know the truth, and they see the truth. And people who come back from the front lines and they're on their vacation, they tell the truth, that how horrible actions are committed by what horrible crimes are committed by the Ukrainian forces that are joined by the NATO forces. Well, we didn't place NATO next to our borders. NATO placed themselves, and they broke their promises. Well, all Russians know it. So we're kind of, smart and intellectual to be able to find out what is true and what is not. And people do it and manage it very well.
And of course, there are accusations from both sides about abuses on the battlefield. But as the new administration comes into the US, eyes are turning towards a peace deal. I want to get your perspective on what you regard as a fair peace deal to end the war.
I don't know. Look, first of all, I don't know if the US administration, the new one, is actually credible in terms of what they say and what they do. Because the last time when Trump came to power, I was living in the United States those days, and then they made me to serve prison time for actually peace building in the US, and Trump was in charge. So he was promising to make good relationships with Russia, but in fact, we had more sanctions and more diplomats expelled, and people were more and more distant, removed from each other. I mean, the US people and the Russians that had ever been. So they say they want to stop the conflict. Do they really want to do so? I don't know. And for right now, I do believe that the US is way more focused on the Israel-Palestinian situation than on Ukraine and Russia, because they clearly understand by now that Russia is going to win. There is no options, and the people they know the truth, and they're gonna fight until the last breath. I mean, the Russians, and Ukraine will lose. There is no other way. And additionally to that, now there are so many people fleeing the West, moving to Russia, that you have to be blind not to see that not just the war on the war field is lost by the West, but they also lost the war for the minds and souls of people if they're moving to Russia. Well, I know I handle this program in the Russian parliament, and I can see every single day more and more people coming with families. They just hate LGBT stuff, and they want to live and raise their families and kids in a peaceful community that which they view Russia. So we struggle now how to get so many people in, because they come and there are a lot of them, and they're investors and they have money and do all this stuff. So it's quite surprising for me. But it means the West lost the battle for the souls and for the hearts of the people as well.
Well, the report of there haven't been many reports in terms of people moving to Russia on the western side. Perhaps that wouldn't be surprising. But either way, both Presidents Putin and Trump are regarded as tough negotiators. Who do you regard as the stronger of the two? And do you expect any compromise from President Putin on his objectives?
I expect not a compromise, but I expect a consensus. I mean, I expect both sides to focus on what is profitable for each side, but not on the losses and compromises of which one. And I do believe that this is the only way how to negotiate. Well, first, number one thing that the US should do, they just take their selves out of Europe, because that's not their land. That's not their decision. That's not their solution. There is not their land. They had to get out and let people, Europeans, to decide themselves how they want to live, because they now press every single country in Europe, all the countries, to just follow their will, but they shall not have any power here. There is no reason, and they're just flooding Europe with their money and trying to buy politicians. That's what in fact they do. And that's not the peaceful negotiations. Whom to negotiate with? European countries, including Ukraine now, they lost their sovereignty. They cannot just freely talk anymore, which means that if you want a peaceful, a good deal, the US should step back and realize that this is not their land.
Let me get your perspective, Ms. Butina, on how life has changed for ordinary people in Russia since the war began. How have the economic sanctions been felt? What impact are they having?
Well, we have full grocery stores. We don't have any problems central heating. We don't have any skyrocket prices. We're actually fine. The main thing that changed, and this is absolutely true, that we're all now stand together side by side, because any time when in Russia some external force is trying to push us, we become more and more united. That's what happened. So now I see a lot of patriotism in Russia, because we know that we have to be close to each other to stand against NATO. Like, that's not a secret anymore. There is no just Ukraine. This is now NATO fighting by Ukrainian lives. That's how it's called. which means that Russians do know, do understand, and they stand by side. And now we are welcoming new foreigners who come, join us and help us. This is what's going on. This is the average mood in Russia. Yes, the hardships, but we used to live in the hardships. Look, they had it during their Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. And yeah, we know how to sorrow. But on the other hand, this is how we used to live. So by external pressure, you cannot conquer Russia. Our empire has been lost for the last ages and will stand ages to come. It's one of the longest standing empires in the world, multinational. So we're going to be okay. Hard times, but it will make us stronger.
Well, so presumably the reports of increased inflation must be having an impact on the day-to-day lives and will start to test the will of the Russian people.
I don't think so. We have challenges on our will every single day, and because of the living and the weather conditions. So we're kind of used to go through hardships. But talking of inflation, yeah, there are hard times. People understand that, and they just work hard. And actually, sanctions open new opportunities for us, because the companies that used to be very small now became big, because now we don't have Western products, and they have to take the market, and they love to take the market share. And we have a lot of partners in the BRICS countries that help us, and they want to trade, and we explore new brands. So we don't suffer at all. Meaning that it's not just the US who produces all the things. It's not just Europe. Europe needs Russia because of the gas and and oil and all this stuff. Russia has all the resources in the world. Why would we suffer?
Ms. Butina, I'm just looking at your past, and you lived in America for a while. Of course, it was a difficult time for you. You're accused of being a Russian operative and so on. But are you personally surprised or even saddened by the state of relations between Russia and America? And how do you think the ordinary people in both countries reflect the views of the leadership?
I am sad, because when I came to the States, I expected the American dream to be like we saw in the Hollywood movies in the 70s and the 80s. I expected conservative America, and I expected people who just, have one wonderful yard and they have wonderful families, and America has none of that. Like, not anymore. It's just they lost the country, and now all of that I see here in Russia. And it's just, the world is upside down, indeed. Do I think that people actually share the views of the US government? Well, I don't know, because I see so many people moving from the States, and they hate the government. Well, and they don't like Russia maybe necessarily, but they don't hate us, because people are people. And I used to actually serve time for having friendship dinners that were paid, by the way, by Americans. And I don't know why I became a Russian agent then, but anyway. So, and the friendship dinners just showed that people want to talk. That's why I support now the civil diplomacy. Well, I did serve time for civil diplomacy, but I was and I am a peace builder, and I will do it in the future, because I believe, and you're absolutely right, if people talk to each other, they don't hate each other. And this is the only way how we can never, ever have the Third World War, because that's my great hope. I don't want any serious conflict between Russia and NATO, because, the whole world will suffer.
Well, you obviously must have made friends during that time in America. As you said, you had dinners with them and so on. In spite of your conviction as an unregistered operative in the country, do you have any particular regrets, and are you still in touch with any of those people?
Yeah, actually, yes. Some of them incognito, but they come here to Russia. It's very sad that we cannot communicate so much, because they're afraid of the US government, that they're going to reach them and, cut them and throw them in prison, because I'm under sanctions. And so I don't want to put them in danger as well. But they do travel here, because this is friendship. Friendship is eternal. Love is eternal. These are the values that the US lost, but there are still people who are like this. And no, I do not hate the United States. I do not hate Americans, because if I do, it means that the bad guys win. So I don't want them to win. That's why I stay faithful. I believe in God. I am conservative, and I will fight for peace until my last breath.
Let me ask you, you, as in the conversation, you always denied being a Russian spy. So what do you think was the reason the justice system there pursued the case and put you in jail? Was it bureaucracy, do you think, or do you think there was a political reason behind it?
I was never accused of being a spy, okay? That's in the first place. Never. It was in the media. It had never been in my conviction, had never been even filed as a paper. And they needed a scapegoat. They needed someone physically to actually arrest at the day when Trump and Putin met. Look at the day of my arrest. Do you think it's a coincidence? They arrested me exactly when President Putin, President Trump were first time to meet, sit in front of each other, and they have this very, very loud case. Because somebody in the US, they don't want peace. They want war because they earn on wars. The private military companies are earning a lot of having wars all over the globe. Question is to us, to Russia, to Europeans, Arabs, Chinese, and all other countries. How are we going to let them do that? Are earning money on our life losses? I don't think that's smart. So they needed a scapegoat. They got a scapegoat. And look, if they would have even one piece of evidence that I am a spy, would they let me go in 18 months? No way. I would serve 35 years now, but there was nothing on me. Absolutely nothing. That's why they just wanted the public case and just throw me out of the country, claim I'm the national security threat. Yeah, you can see I'm very much a threat. And then just, make it. And they're still having fun on my case, saying like, oh, look, if she met someone, that means she, had relationships. And they never ever shown one picture. And as a woman, I'm deeply insulted by that because they were claiming almost this relationship with someone. There is no one picture being made. Isn't it suspicious? Well, because it had never happened. This is a fictitious, fake case. This is how Trump says this is fake news.
Well, either way, they put you in prison. Didn't that change your view of the United States at all?
No, because people are people, and corrupted guys in the government are corrupted guys in the government. And, one thing has changed in me after prison and during my prison time. I spent 4 months on solitary confinement, which is against all the conventions against tortures, but don't forget about it. I found God, or God found me, I don't know. But I know one thing, that I shall not hate, and I do not hate. I forgive them. It doesn't mean I should forget, but I forgive them. So, and the bad guys, they will pay their price because you know what? God is just. This is what I believe. I don't need to do any revenge on them. No, that's not my job. God will do everything. And all the people who acted badly, they will get their punishment no matter what. Even if we do nothing and just sitting and watching that, the justice is going to get.
So if you have moved on, but, don't you really want to clear your name officially in the US?
I actually tried. I filed an appeal case, but the problem is that when you're sentenced in the US, you lose your right to appeal because you sign a special paper, or they don't sentence you ever. That's the law. That you cannot appeal and you don't want to appeal, which is maybe sad. And I was very excited when Duran's report got out because there is nothing on me there, because that was the case that they actually based my conviction off, meaning the money that supposedly went from Kremlin to Trump. And then look at the Duran report, there was no money. The question is, why did I serve my time? So would I try to prove that I'm not guilty in the US court now? No, because it's corrupted. It does not make sense. I'll just lose money. In the future, maybe. Well, yes, it's insulting that my name was placed in dirt, because I'm from a family, a very distinguished family of teachers, and I am a teacher by myself. I've always been a peace builder, and I teach kids. And now kids look at me saying like, oh, this is a, whatever they call her, a Russian honeypot. I've never been. And this is an insult. But there will be a day. I know there will be a day. And the history will place everything on its deserving spots.
Well, of course, when you were deported from America to Russia, in the American eyes, you were seen as a spy. I'm curious, how were you regarded in Russia? I know Vladimir Putin said he'd never heard of you at the time.
Well, he mentioned my name a couple of times, but why should he? Meaning I was just a student. That's the thing. I was just a student. Yes, my country fought for me because I'm a Russian citizen, and now I am having this parliament position of fighting for those who are oppressed and are in the prisons because they are Russians. There are a lot of them. And every single person here will stand for a Russian because, you know, we know that tomorrow you will be at this spot. And, well, I do my job here. I'm a lawmaker. I help to people who move into Russia from the West. That's my responsibility today, and I'm very excited to do so. I do have a lot of work. No weekend, no vacation, not because I'm suffering, but because I love my job. That's why, because I love helping people. I used to be a peacemaker. I love helping people. That's what I do today. I help people in prison, and they put me on solitary again for that. I don't care. I know what I do, and I do it for God. And people will do no harm for me because God is with me. Who are people if God is with me?
Yeah, I was wondering about your visit to the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny in jail when he was on hunger strike. Why did you do that, and what did he say to you?
He was complaining that he has so bad conditions, so I wanted to check. And I went there, and I saw that he's lying. And I said straight to his eyes, and unfortunately, he didn't grant the permission to show the footage of what he was talking to me. He called me, well, I won't pronounce it because I'm a woman and I don't want this to be, you know, public again, but he called me very bad words that is, I think, inappropriate from man to say to a woman, and it's unproven. He just repeated the US claims. It was insulting, but anyway, that was not my goal. I told the cameras and the camera crew from the very beginning, because look, I almost died. I went through tortures. I know what tortures are. And if I see just a sign that he's like that, I would stop it, because I would never let my country do what they did with me in the US. I lost my health. I mean, I lost my reputation, everything for doing nothing. So when I went there, I just wanted to ask how he's doing. And if he needs any help, I do help people to prisons all the time, but he was just fine. He was just cursing me out and just wanted to have, you know, PRI on everything. And I don't know why he did it. I don't know, because I am happy to help. And it doesn't matter if you're an accuser of me, if you're, you know, my former FBI agent, I will always help. That's my nature. So, and it was so horrible and painful that he was just, you know, I don't know why he did so. I mean, I can see some of his mind.
Based on what you just said, Ms. Butina, considering his reaction to you and you were surprised by his very negative behavior with you, first of all, were you surprised when he died in prison? And secondly, having found religion, did you pray for him? Because religion involves forgiveness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every single moment. And actually, when he got sick first time after that plane flight, that was, and God will judge me if I'm lying here. Because the first thing there was a COVID time, and I remember it was in my apartment, and I was praying hard, so he gets through it. And God gave him another chance, and he went through it. And the second time, the same. I will pray especially for people who hate me, especially for people who curse me out, because I am a Jesus Christ believer. That's it. You can't change it. Well, you can't explain it for a person who is non-believer, but absolutely yes. And again, if his wife tomorrow shows up and she needs my help, I will help. If tomorrow people who curse me out and, you know, place me in prison, throw me on solitary, are going to pray for my help, I will pray for them and I will help, because God says me to do so. It's in the Bible. I will follow the Bible, because I know that this life now is nothing comparatively to what is ahead. So I it's hard to explain the face. It's just, it is. I'm helping now here. We have a group of traditional Catholics that were, you know, in the US called domestic terrorists in the FBI note, and many of them now moved to Russia. I am a Russian Orthodox. Why would I help them to establish here a church? They are legal now, they're registered, it's all okay. They have a little chapel now, but I want for them better conditions. Not Catholic, why shall I do so? Because I'm Christian. Right? Well, so, and I will help to a Muslim, to a Christian, to anyone who needs help.
On that note, I wanted to touch a bit on your work as a politician in Russia now, and you've touched on this issue of helping people to resettle from the West into Russia. I'd indicated earlier it's not something widely reported in the media in the West, but how important is that as a project for you, and what's your real motivation for doing it?
Well, my real motivation is to help people because nothing makes me more happy. Well, you can call me selfish and egoistic, but that's what gives me joy, helping others. When I see all these families setting up and having their houses and having jobs and their kids, step by step learning Russian language and, telling me stories about their own culture. I have this wonderful, fantastic family of Joseph Schutzman. He's an American who moved to Russia recently. He has seven kids and 3 girls. And these 3 girls asked me to translate Russian fairy tales into English. Well, I'm not great in translating fairy tales, but it's so charming. So for me, the motivation is, it's just the soul. Well, I don't know if my soul is pure because I'm the worst sinner you could imagine. Well, because I have to confess all the time because I misstep all the time. But I just have joy when people smile and people have their lives and families and they live as conservatives, and it's wonderful. Yeah, we have this program, and actually we just established a group called Welcome to Russia, and I serve on the board. We also have people there with dual citizenship from Germany and France and Australia and Austria, and so those are now Russian citizens. They serve on the board with me because we hold hands. We're holding hands to help to those who are looking for the Salvation Ark, and the Salvation Ark today for conservatives is Russia, and the word gets out. So we have many applications from those people.
Well, let me ask you, Ms. Butina, do you think more people will move if there is a peace deal?
I don't think it's related. Well, the number one reason why people come here is because they believe in God, they're conservatives, and they hate and they do not accept LGBT agenda. Well, if the US will come back being a conservative state and they stop the LGBT propaganda, then maybe people just, always prefer to keep their homes. But you should understand they come not because they want to, they come out of necessity because they know that their kids are trained now and against your will as parents to become LGBT, so you lose your future. So people come here not because they necessarily love Russia, but because they're looking for a safe place where they actually survive and they keep their culture and ancestries until their world and the times to come. That's why. So I don't think it's related to Ukraine or Russia or any military zone. It's more related to their hearts and souls.
It's an interesting point you raise about the LGBT community. What's the situation for those already in Russia? What's their current prospect?
Well, the LGBT in Russia is banned. And yeah, absolutely. The whole movement cannot propagate. You cannot go on the streets and do parades and we are very proud of that. We're very proud that we have God in our constitution. We are very proud that we have mother and father in our constitution because we don't take any other gender because God created us this way. And yes, Russia is a conservative state today. And yes, LGBT is not welcome here. Okay? I think that's fine. We don't put people on a treatment or something, but okay, whatever you believe, but you have not bring it to the kids at schools, not on the streets. You cannot do propaganda of LGBT, and you cannot have any official or unofficial movements of LGBT community. Okay, that's just our country. We're a sovereign country. That's what we decided. That is the path we decided for ourselves.
Well, Maria Butina, I thank you very much for making the time to join the show.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Naguib Sawiris, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Always a pleasure, Had.
I want to get a sense of where Naguib sees the world today.
I think the world is in a very dangerous mode because of the rise of new dictators in different jurisdictions who have consolidated power in one person. That includes the US, by the way, what's upcoming. And when there is a lack of accountability or a lack of, I don't know how the Senate and the Congress will deal in America with the new president.
Do you see him as a dictator, Donald Trump?
He's the democratic form of dictator. Yes, I see him as a dictator. I mean, this is what he would love to have. So now if he has the Senate and the Congress, we're going to see, you know. But shaping world destiny. Putin is a dictator. So all these powerful dictators, because of their countries, can do something crazy or stupid, and we end up. Now Russia is sending ballistic rockets to Ukraine. So if we're going to escalate, you know, I mean, it could end up very, very badly. You know, you don't control these individuals. If they give an order, they live because they are dictators. So the people around them just do what they tell them.
Yeah, you're not risk averse when it comes to working in countries under essentially dictatorships. You've worked in North Korea, you've worked elsewhere, the opportunities.
No, I don't try to mix my political views with my business, you know. But I have a passion to go places where I have a soft spot for, you know. Like I feel like I want to do something which will be remembered. I would go to a country that nobody wants to go because I want to build something that has never been built before. So when I'm not there after many years and I die, they say, well, there was this Egyptian investor, he came here, he promised he will do 1, 2, 3, and he did 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and did something great. So I get well remembered. And
but you don't shy away.
No, I never shy away, you know. You see, I fear nothing or nobody and except God, you know. So people think sometimes I'm crazy, and I try to explain to them it's not being brave, it's about my faith. You know, I believe God is on my side, so nobody can stand in my way.
What do you think about the situation in the region today?
Also very bad, very sad everywhere. You see, we still have problems in Libya divided between two sections, and there's still some uncertainty. You have Syria with uncertainty, and 3-4 other countries meddling in Syrian affairs. Look at Lebanon, what's happening now with the destruction of Lebanon, this beautiful country with beautiful people. They're paying a price for some military force that took over Lebanon by force and ignoring all the facts of Sudan, a disaster. The two fractions are having a war where they know no one will win. So they'll keep just breaking down, destroying, and who's paying the price? The civilian people who are now 18 million stranded. There's hunger threats, and one party is also very, how can I say, very stubborn.
You're invested in Sudan, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, you name it, wherever there are problems, you find me there.
There you are. There you are. Tell me this, when you take a step back and think about the media landscape, for example, Comcast has decided to offload CNBC, MSNBC, several of the brands that were under their umbrella. They've moved away from cable, in a sense. How do you see this all evolving?
You see, media is a very difficult business. Very difficult to make money in media. Usually, you guys, you take your salaries, you take your bonuses, we pay for cost and everything. When it comes to income, now what is the income? Advertising is coming totally down. Social media now is taking over. So, no income. For Comcast, the original idea was to buy content. So they thought this is content. Now they see that it has changed completely.
With Peacock, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I see...
it's difficult to stay ahead in that.
I see the media will lose influence. Digital, social media will take over. So whoever didn't do the shift is going to suffer, you know.
So in the interest in purchasing legacy assets like CNBC or MSNBC?
No. They're dying assets.
Yeah. And
also because we started a platform here, a digital platform for the young people, the young millennials, you know, the people who want to understand how to become an entrepreneur, how to be able to get money if you're from venture capitalists, you know, how to advance, what are the main exciting new areas in business, you know. So all these other traditional stations, they're still with the stock exchange and the reviews of the companies and like that, you know, they haven't...
They're not interactive.
They haven't evolved.
Walk me through this one. When you see tweets from Elon Musk, perhaps jokingly suggesting he might purchase MSNBC. Do you see that happening?
I don't know, but he's not been known. I mean, I thought when he bought Twitter that this was a very bad investment, you know. And look what he's done, you know, so you never know. I mean, look, the guy is a genius. And if you don't like him, then there's something wrong about you, not about him.
Do you think it's worrying, the relationship he has, the bromance he has with Donald Trump? Or was it inevitable?
No, it's actually interesting to show you how we can turn tables. You see, we capitalists or entrepreneurs, we also like people to understand our value. So when you go against us, okay, you have to be prepared for a fight, see, because we are more imaginative. What's an entrepreneur? He has an imagination, he has fantasy, but he has also the might of persistence. So you want to go to war against someone like us? Be my guest, you know. Him or me or anyone else.
You're based at least part of the time here in Dubai. You've grown your business here. Where are the opportunities that you see?
Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the Emirates, you smell the money in the air. You see, I mean, opportunities are immense here. And tell me why. Because there is no interference. If you're an honest businessman and you have a good idea and you have a plan and you'll obey by the rules, you're so welcomed here. The ease of doing business, the ease of traveling in and out, the ease of administrative issues. There's no place in the world like here, you know. And I believe Saudi Arabia is going in the right way, and they will achieve what these people are here, but they need to be faster because people here will not stop advancing. You know, the rulers here, they wake up in the morning with one thought only: what can we do better for our people and for our guests or for our so and they sit and they come up with a new idea, with a new action, and then they execute. Where else? You know, most other countries, people are entangled in their routine meetings with some ambassador or some visitors or some crisis in the region or this and that. Here, nothing is stopping the progress, you know.
Where else would you invest? Because you're always looking for new opportunities. What's interesting to you? Would you put money in a place, for example, like Russia?
No, I will not put money in Russia because I'm standing with Ukraine, clearly. You see, I think what Putin should have done is he should have told them, look, guys, don't go into NATO because we believe this is a security threat to ourselves, you know. And if you go, I will come in. I will march in and it will be war. I think the Ukrainians would have taken his words seriously, and they would have delayed this issue with the NATO, you know, and we would have prevented the war. But he didn't do that. He just woke up one day and decided, now I'm marching in.
Yeah.
He says, well, we tried, and this. No, he didn't put it in a clarity like that. It's like, okay, because he has to acknowledge the fact that it's Ukraine's right to decide who they want to join and what they want to do. So he had to put a very serious message first. What was he worried about? That they will make defenses and prepare? And like, you see, he tried to invade Kiev in the first weeks of the war, and before the whole world helped Ukraine, and they stood strong because it was their national honor, you know. So I would not do that. I will never.
Money done in Ukraine.
Yes, of course.
What looks interesting to you there? Because they need investment in
Post-war,
every
everything.
sector. Yeah.
Everything.
Energy, infrastructure.
Everything. There's everything there. Hospitality, hotels, you know, there's a lot of mining, still many mining opportunities now, and with all this.
So is it more interesting to look at a place like Ukraine than Western Europe?
No, there's just more money to be made. In Western Europe, the competition is higher. Everything is already too regulated. Everything is done. There is a big, giant companies that will compete against you. I mean, you have to go where you, as a businessman coming from Egypt with limited resources, can do something and not have too much competition.
Do you worry about the future of Europe?
Yes, I worry. I criticize this Brexit departure of the UK. I mean, it's what's one of the most stupidest decisions in the history of mankind. They were part of Europe. They're a necessary part of Europe because also Europe has the same enemies, has the same challenges. What the hell did they go out like that? They lost all the investors from other countries. They lost their manpower. Now when you go in restaurants or they tell you, sorry, we have to work only a few days because we can't find the manpower. Now you have to get a visa at the airport to export goods. I mean, it is the most... And a decision like that should have been obtained by absolute majority, which means above 70% or above, not by 51%, which means it was the most ridiculous decision ever. You know?
Would you invest under a Labour government?
No.
Or Keir Starmer's government? No. Why?
Because they started on the wrong foot. They started with taxes and taxation and expelling the foreigners by cancelling the...
Putting
the
business out of business.
Yeah, no.
Not a thing.
No.
And in Europe more generally?
I like Greece. Yeah. I like Greece because it's in Europe, but it has some resemblance to our world, you know, and the people are very nice. And I like Italy. I invested in Italy. My biggest investment in my whole career was in Italy, you know. I bought wind for 15 billion euros, you know. I mean, in the history of LBOs or investments, it's the highest from one individual, you know.
Tell me this. When you look at what's happening in the market today, you're a huge proponent of gold. Where do you see that headed?
You see, we had this question 4 years when you had
we did indeed.
Interview.
And everybody thought you were crazy.
You know, and where did it go now? It's at 2,700, you know. I mean, I was right because it's based on my experience in the mining industry. New gold mines take 6-7 years to start producing from the day you start exploration, which means that the velocity of new mines coming into production is much slower than the consumption. Coupled with the tensions in the world now, and so the Russians and the Chinese are massing up their gold reserves. Why? Because it's a universe currency. They don't want to be hostage to the dollar. Okay? So under this demand is here, it's going very fast, and the offering is very slow. And gold is gold.
Yeah. You mentioned hostage to the dollar. How worrying is a Trump administration in your mind, whether it be with regards to the Fed or the Trump tariffs?
I think we are going to be entertained in the next 4 years massively because you will have a disruptor, which is Donald Trump. And if he disrupts in the right areas, like I like his disruption for the administration. Because in America, the bureaucracy and the administration, and mostly fueled by the Democrats.
You're not surprised they lost?
No, I was not surprised they lost because, look at it, very, very simple. Biden should have left 6 months or a year earlier. She was not the most perfect candidate to be chosen. She was chosen in a hasty manner. She didn't present her case very well at all, in my personal opinion. So they were going to lose anyhow. If they would have put someone like Bill Clinton or that caliber or George Bush the father, or they would have won if they would characters like that, you know. But they came up with a very bad candidate in the last minute. Yes. Of course they lose.
Do you think it was the woke?
Because Donald Trump would have had a lot of people who don't like him. So this would have worked for them, you know.
The woke narrative that we have to be politically correct. Do you think that that is over?
She should have woke up, you know. Not she was in another planet. I mean, I was looking at her and thinking, oh my God, that's imagine this. She would be a president of the United States of America. I mean, America always surprises me with their last candidates. Always, they don't manage to get really the very bad choices at the end. But no, I think you can say things. She had something also working against her. She was there for 4 years. What can she show for? Zero.
Yeah. Tell me this. When you think about business and politics, it was once explained to me by a friend of ours, if you have the money, you want the power, and if you have the power, you want the money. Businessmen going into politics, does that work?
Very bad idea. You know, I used to admire and love the late Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri. And I was in a conference here in Dubai where he attended with Sheikh Mohammed and the others in front, and it was about was a financial conference mixed, you know. So I made a statement, said, why don't you leave the Palestinian problem to the businessmen? We can solve it, you know, instead of the politicians who failed over these years to provide peace. And after I finished, he called me and told me, Naguib, don't do my mistake. Don't go into politics if you're because you're a successful businessman. Don't go into politics. 1 week before he was assassinated.
Really?
So I took the advice very seriously. I make my opinions. I'm opinionated, you know. I can't sit tight and not say when I see something wrong, especially when it concerns my country, okay? Or when it concerns a country I love, like Lebanon or any other place, you know. But it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Speaking of Lebanon, how do you see this playing out for the Lebanese? Because the United States has essentially greenlit everything that Israel's done.
I think Israel has done a big mistake in the way they handled this crisis of the terror attack of October 7, you know, because I think when they will sit back and see they've alienated a lot of the people in the world who have a conscience. You can't kill 42,000 people and feel that we will not sympathize with the Palestinian people, you know, like we sympathize with the victims of October 7. You know, this was a dreadful. But if you don't want me to deny the Holocaust, I cannot deny also, and I hate people who deny the Holocaust. You don't deny that there are 42,000 innocent people died. You didn't get the bad guys. The bad guys, how many of these 42,000 people were Hamas? 14,000 children were in Hamas, so they were not. So you can't prevent the world of feeling sorry for this immense victim, even if you are friendly to Israel, you know. So I believe the American administration has not tried to put some sanity into the situation. Look at now, the hostages are not back. Gaza is totally ruined. 40,000 people died. Now they're destroying in Lebanon, you know. And now they will stop before Hezbollah is finished. So they will stop and leave Hezbollah still there. So,
which was supposedly the point.
Yeah, so I don't know.
For Lebanon.
But Netanyahu also.
Do you think that that was a correct ruling by the International Criminal Court?
It stands for the 42,000 innocent souls that died. Yeah. The question is, you want to get the bad guys? Get the bad guys. You are intelligent, you have technology, you showed it your technology in Lebanon, you know. So why do you make what we call a general punishment? You know? The people of Gaza were occupied by Hamas. The simple people not all the people in Gaza wanted Hamas or accepted Hamas. Because Hamas was a dictatorial power on the people there. They didn't allow them to voice any other opinion. If you were not with them, they would take you and drag you and jail you with no. So the people were also oppressed. So you killed the oppressed people.
Yeah. What happens next in your mind? Does Trump come into office and put an end to wars? Or is the Middle East beyond his abilities?
it's not beyond, because he will have a lot of influence on the Arab countries. But he has a tendency to think that everything will be solved through money and business, which is not right, because he forgets that people have now hate inside them. People have nationalistic feelings about their land. You can't offer me money and you will take my home. So I think he's made a statement which is, in my personal opinion, ridiculous, saying Israel should be bigger. On whose account? On our account. Let them come and take 1 centimeter from Egypt. We will go to war. Yeah. Nobody, doesn't understand the sovereign right of your land. So you want to be bigger in where? You go to the sea, then maybe they can put some more land in the sea.
Dredging. What about Egypt today?
Yeah, Egypt is not to what I would like it to be. It's not to what I would like it to be.
What needs to change?
I mean, this is a bit of that's where I get into trouble, with questions like that. So I don't want to say, but I say we need more freedom. We need to support the private sector and open the doors completely. We need to eliminate the competition of the public sector and the army and the business. We need to restore the political life by allowing real elections and real
debate, real conversation.
We need a parliament that is not based on interest groups or people who paid money to become an MP. There's a lot of changes are needed.
Do you imagine we'd be talking about these things 10 years ago in terms of the future of Egypt?
Well, to be honest, nobody expected when we got the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt and we welcomed President Sisi that this is going to be the way forward that has happened,
Yeah. And it's disappointing.
You said it. You said it.
Walk me through Monify. Tell me what this platform's all about. What led you to this? I know originally you were thinking...
So Monify is I always wanted to have a financial station or a platform, but that is unique. That is not going against CNBC or Bloomberg because we don't have the budget anyhow. But that
and linear may be over.
Sorry, of course, yeah. And that's why you had to go and cater for the young generation, the millennials, and see what they like, what are they interested in. And most of them, they would like to be an entrepreneur. They would like to start their own business. So what this station is going to do is going to tell them, where are the future investment opportunities? Is it in space? Is it in digital or Bitcoin or where? And how to start their businesses, how to approach venture capital companies, and
it also gives you a leg up yourself because you're seeing these companies at the most nascent.
Yes, and also me, I'm very interested into promoting the youth. I never refuse an opportunity to speak to the young people, to explain to them, take their questions and give them advice. So now I will have a platform that will do exactly that. It's just in the beginning now. We're going to add on it. We have to introduce artificial intelligence into it to reduce our cost. We have to do a newsroom, that is different. We have to see also how we will get some income, because now the advertising income is not really a main source now. So we have to be very innovative how we can do an interaction with our viewers and get some money out of that relation. Yes, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me this.
It's difficult.
No doubt. Tell me this, though. What inspired you to do this?
As I told you, I'm in times of my life now where I want to give back to society. So my family, we have a very big social organization called the Sawiris Foundation. It spends, I think, £1 to £2 billion a year into Egypt, trying to create jobs, help all the NGOs that are providing jobs or training or medical or education. So this is good, and it's an institution, okay? But because I am egocentric a bit, so I want to do something that would be named after me, like a great good deed. So I consider that one of them. In the same thing, I think that the Emirates here, they need a new financial station, because the stock markets here are now booming, especially in Abu Dhabi now with all the restructuring that has, the brilliant restructuring that has happened, So I believe we are in the right spot, and then we're in a place here where ease of doing business is clear. everything is very easy here. You know, we got our license like that, everything.
Yeah. You mentioned AI. When you look at technology today, and of course it's developing rapidly, what in your mind is going to be the challenge there? Because I do so often stories about energy using AI.
Yeah, people have talked a lot about that. The challenges are clear. You're going to not need half of your manpower. People will lose their jobs. So what's the plan for these people? Yeah. Okay. The other problem is the misuse. You will have more of now fake news through AI. You will be able to imitate the voice, the look. So whom will we believe when we see now a video in 5 years? Is it true? It's not true. How about criminality? I mean, I go ChatGPT. How can I rob a bank? Or you know, how can I open a safe model so and so and so? Imagine if it gives you the answer. Yeah. So easy. Everything is going to be easier. Even fraud, corruption, criminality, everything. So it's a very dangerous era we're going to go in. You know. So unless there will be it will be regulated, and there will going to be laws that tell you what you can do and what you cannot do.
Is that going to require some kind of global understanding, like we had in the internet?
Yes, exactly.
Early days,
exactly.
Bill Clinton.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Tell me this. Okay, so beyond AI, beyond the technology of everything, what's exciting to you? Is it the fact that you're actually a DJ?
Yeah, you will laugh, but when I DJ, I love music. So it's moments.
I've seen you dance. Yes.
Moments of my happiness. Yeah. I love music, and when I DJ, I know I have a good taste in the choice of the music I choose.
Yes.
And I see the response of people. It just puts me alive. It makes me feel alive, you know. And maybe you don't know, but I never grew over 30 years. I never grew.
So is that your advice? Don't grow up.
Don't grow up, because it's stupid to grow up. Yeah. You know, if you keep a young spirit like I think I have, I never grow up, and I don't want to grow up. I prefer to go out with the age group where I stopped growing up, 30s. That's my favorite age group.
Love it. Cheers to that.
Thank you.
Naguib Sawiris, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Thank you, Adli.
We go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on today's programme. Ukraine's Western allies appear to be focusing on diplomacy to prepare Ukraine for talks with President Putin. That's despite NATO warnings of his, quote, reckless actions. After seizing Aleppo, Syria's opposition forces are closing in on Hama in an unprecedented offensive against the Syrian government. Joining us in just a moment is Robert S. Ford, the former and last US ambassador to Damascus. And the US President Joe Biden's decision to grant his son a full pardon has triggered more reaction and more debate on the use of the pardon system. Hello and welcome to the programme. First, world leaders are weighing up whether the solution for Ukraine lies in more military aid or increased diplomacy with Russia. Well, speaking last night, the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said in a closely watched foreign policy speech that his goal was to, quote, put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations. Well, just last month, both Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron pledged to support Ukraine unwaveringly and for as long as was necessary to counter Russia. But that seems to have changed for now.
We must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence, and the right to choose their future.
The British Prime Minister speaking there. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is rushing to send Ukraine another weapons aid package. That's despite concerns over depleting US stockpiles. And NATO's new Secretary-General Mark Rutte says that President Putin is ramping up his, quote, reckless actions in Ukraine and is therefore pushing Ukraine's allies to step up military aid.
Ukraine is entering another crucial winter, and Russia's aggression shows no sign of abating. Just the opposite. Putin is ramping up his rhetoric and reckless actions. He is using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles and is deploying North Korean soldiers in this illegal war. Putin is not interested in peace. He is pressing on, trying to take more territory, because he thinks he can break Ukraine's resolve and ours. But he is wrong.
The NATO Secretary-General speaking there. Well, NATO's foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss the war in Ukraine and plans for future support. Well, for the latest, we can speak now to Michael Binion, who is the Times of London's former foreign and Moscow correspondent and current editorial writer. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start by talking about the discussions in Brussels and just listening as well to those clips before we cross to you. And there doesn't there, seem to be a realization amongst Ukraine's allies that a deal, some sort of a negotiated settlement, looks increasingly likely. Do you share that opinion?
Yes, I do. I think it's the war as it now is going on is unsustainable for Ukraine. Sadly, they have lost a very large number of people. They're also having high desertion rates, and opinion polls within Ukraine have shown that more than half the population now thinks they would like to negotiate some sort of deal with the Russians. The key thing, of course, is a deal that is at least gives Ukraine a measure of its own independence and future, and isn't just a pure surrender to everything that Russia wants. And that is very difficult to achieve without considerable pressure on Russia, which means that Ukraine, for now, needs to be supported as much as it can, militarily and politically.
Yeah, and Ukraine, once again, calling for NATO membership and really appealing to those assembled in Brussels to give it to the country. He says it's the only real guarantee for its security going forward. I mean, do you think it's likely to get that membership anytime soon?
Well, actually, I don't know. I mean, I know that words were said at the last NATO meeting and encouraging phrases about, sometime in the future. But to be realistic, it seems very unlikely, partly because both Germany and the United States, key large NATO contributors, are opposed to the idea, and also because under NATO rules, you're not allowed to be a member of the alliance unless you control all your territory. And since Ukraine will not renounce any territory that the Russians continue to occupy, it won't have full control of its entire territory. Nevertheless, I think some sort of a security guarantee could be given to Ukraine without it actually being a full member of the alliance.
OK, we heard a clip of Mark Rutte just before we crossed to you. He said, amongst other things as well, quote, Putin is not interested in peace. He's pressing on, trying to take more territory because he thinks he can break Ukraine's territory and our resolve as well. I mean, do you buy into this argument of strengthening Kyiv ahead of negotiations? How would that work?
Well, it means giving Kyiv the weapons it needs, and very quickly. I mean, lots has been promised, but not enough delivered and not enough on time. So it does mean rushing things forward as fast as possible. But it's also true that Putin is trying to grab as much territory as possible, because the shape of a future deal, I mean, it's already clear to most people, and that is that the front line is frozen more or less where it is. There will be a ceasefire. I'm afraid there will be no peace deal because neither Ukraine nor Russia trust each other, and certainly no one trusts Putin. But if the conflict is frozen where it is, then Russia will be in a hurry to grab as much territory as possible. Obviously, the Ukrainians would have to withdraw from the Kursk area after their incursion there. But otherwise, the lines will probably be frozen where they end up when the actual ceasefire comes into effect.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the United States is sending another $725 million worth of weaponry and military support to Ukraine, obviously angering Moscow even more, who says this is, again, pouring oil on the fire or fuel on the fire. I mean, how do you think Moscow envisions things unfolding?
Well, I think they see things actually moving more or less in their direction. I mean, their illusion that Trump would just give them anything on a plate, which they seem to have harbored for a while, I think will be shattered, because I don't think Trump will do that, certainly because his opponents in America are taunting him with the idea that if he just turns Ukraine over to the Russians, he would be scuttling out in the same way that Biden scuttled out of Afghanistan, which Trump criticized very strongly at the time. And I think there are resounding efforts from all parties, Europe, America's allies, the NATO Secretary General, and everyone else, to tell Mr. Trump that Ukraine is actually essential. Arming Ukraine is essential for general Western defense in the face of aggression, because otherwise America will look weak and other allies will cease to rely on it and trust its word. So I think Mr. Trump will not be a pushover that the Russians had hoped. Nevertheless, they are in a strong position at the moment. They are moving forward fast. They have learned a lot of military lessons that they clearly didn't know at the beginning of the campaign when they fought so badly. Things are going their way, and Ukraine is increasingly desperate, short of ammunition, short of men, and now I have to say, short of morale.
Yeah, and just picking up on one of the points you made there, I mean, just echoing one of your early points, the NATO Secretary General said that a bad deal ran the risk of emboldening China and North Korea. So, you know, far-reaching implications of a bad deal if such a deal was struck in Ukraine. I mean, do you get the sense that the incoming Trump administration is now beginning to realize this is a lot more complicated than it looked on the campaign trail and not the sort of situation that can be resolved in a short telephone conversation?
Well, I think actually being in power brings a sense of realism to any administration, and whatever they say in advance, the facts on the ground and the briefings they'll get, especially from the United States military and from senior intelligence officers, will make them understand that there is quite a lot to be done. I mean, you do need the initial conviction and push from the president himself, and he's determined to try to get this resolved, as much for his own glory as for the sake of Western solidarity and defense. But I think it will mean that it's not quite as simple as just ending it in 24 hours, which is what he said he would do on the campaign trail.
And Donald Trump has said in the last couple of days he's got a new Ukraine envoy as part of his lineup by the name of Keith Kellogg. I was just wondering whether you know anything about him and what you think he perhaps brings to the table.
Well, General Kellogg has had quite a long experience with dealing with Ukraine already, and he is already on top of the issue. I mean, I think he's got all the briefings and he's been there and seen things and understands. He's met people from Ukraine. So I think he has the facts at his fingertips, which, of course, is essential if you want to plot the next move and do so quickly. So he's probably quite a good choice. He is pretty skeptical and has been publicly of Ukraine's ability to continue fighting. It may sound disheartening to the Ukrainians, but I think there is a sense of realism there. And however much the West should and ought and will, I think, support Ukraine, the fact is they're in a very difficult position at the moment, and that should be recognized.
Do you get the impression that if the new administration in Washington were to reduce support or pull the plug entirely in its support for Ukraine, where the European powers would step up to the plate and fill the void? Can they step up to the plate and fill the void?
Well, that's the big question, and that's the one that the Europeans have been privately discussing among themselves for 2 or 3 months now. Well, at least since Mr. Trump was elected. And the possibility of him being elected made them focus on that even before then. And yes, they would have to step up to the plate, certainly if the United States cut off all military aid and did so quickly, then I think it would be extremely difficult for the Europeans to support Ukraine to the level that it made fighting a realistic possibility. The Europeans have given away most of the stuff that was on their shelves already. They have no spare ammunition, tanks, aircraft, and other necessary things to just turn over to Ukraine without actually ramping up their production very quickly. Also, it would cost an enormous amount of money. And for all the goodwill there is in Europe, I don't think European public opinion is ready to pay the huge taxes that would be needed to raise the money for such an increase in defence spending.
Just before we cross to you, we heard a clip of the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, sounding extremely resolute in his support and British support for Ukraine. I mean, the United Kingdom sounding like it's been one of the most supportive countries to Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. Do you think that Sir Keir Starmer is going to be able to win over Donald Trump and somehow exert some influence on him to sort of bring him into the fold of Ukraine supporters? How do you rate his chances?
Well, that's the big question for Starmer. I mean, in many areas, Ukraine especially, but in other areas as well, it looks as though that Labour, well, the Prime Minister and the present government, is being asked to choose between the European Union, where he wants to get closer, and the United States. And this is in a whole series of things like climate change, raising tariffs, all the other things that Mr. Trump has promised to do that may be cause of conflict with Europe. And how that Britain can actually keep a foot in both camps is going to be difficult. But clearly, I think Starmer wants to strengthen the alliance with America as much as possible and show solidarity in the hope of being able to influence Trump along the lines of what many Europeans would like to see, particularly over Ukraine.
And just lastly, I mean, going back to the situation on the battleground and really re-examining any eventual negotiations that we were talking about at the beginning. I mean, do you think it's fair to say that with each passing day, as we see, and as you've been saying, Ukraine's forces are struggling, notably on the Eastern Front? So we've got news today of more villages being captured by Russia in the southeast. Do you think it's fair to say that Ukraine's negotiating position is in fact getting weaker by the day as things currently stand?
It is indeed, and of course Putin knows that, and that's why Putin is in no hurry to make any deal, because he thinks that the Ukrainian resistance may collapse altogether if he holds on for long enough and sends wave after wave of more Russian soldiers. The problem for Ukraine is shortage of manpower. They have a much smaller population anyway. They've suffered a large number of casualties. We don't know the exact number, but very many. And there is increasing reluctance among young Ukrainians to serve in the army. There's been a high rate of desertion now. A lot of people are dodging the draft. And without full commitment by everyone, it's getting difficult. And of course, the other problem is people are increasingly reluctant to serve on the front if they think they've not got the right air cover to protect them. And at the moment, they don't have that. They don't have the weapons they need to stop these much more efficient Russian drone and missile attacks and the sheer weight of numbers that Russia is throwing against them.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you speaking to us. Michael Binion, thank you.
OK, thanks a lot.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian foreign minister is calling on NATO allies to send at least 20 more air defense systems to stave off Russian attacks. This following on from the recent strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Well, let's get some more analysis now from Sir Gerald Howarth, who is the former British Defence Minister. Sir Gerald, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, gave an important speech on foreign affairs at the Lord Mayor's annual banquet in London. We heard a clip of it before we crossed to you. The UK, he says, is going to continue backing Ukraine for as long as it takes. I mean, do you get the impression that the UK has done enough?
No, I don't think the UK has done enough, but then the UK has done far more than virtually every other country, except, belatedly, of course, in the case of the United States, where President Biden, pressed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, did eventually take action. But all his actions have been wrung out of him after pressure, a bit here and a bit there, and it's all, I'm afraid, in my view, too late. But the United Kingdom has played an important role, and in fairness to the current government, I think that Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has been uncompromising in his assertion that the United Kingdom stands foursquare with Ukraine, but under no circumstances should we or anybody else tell Ukraine to give up their sovereign territory to Russia as a result of its brutal invasion. That would be reprehensible in my view, not least because we are signatories to the Budapest Memorandum, signed 29 years ago this week by the President of Russia, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, President of the United States, under which we agreed to respect the sovereignty, independence and existing borders of Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up its entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. So Russia is in flagrant breach of an agreement itself signed.
I want to come back to you on the Budapest Memorandum in just a moment, but I want to pick up on something else you were saying at the beginning there about how a lot of the weaponry that has been given to Ukraine, a lot of the assistance that's been given to Ukraine has come rather late in the day. And I'd just like to ask for your thoughts on that. Why don't you think it was given earlier?
Oh, it's perfectly clear. It was not given earlier because of a fear of escalation. We were too timid, in my view. I thought right at the outset that we should do absolutely everything possible, throw as much weaponry in support of Ukraine as we possibly could. It frustrated me that the Germans weren't prepared to send tanks, the Americans weren't prepared to allow F-15s to go to Ukraine, and it was all just too little, too late. And Putin could see that and has taken advantage of it. When all those tanks were lined up outside Kyiv, when they were stuck in the mud, I must say at the time I thought, well, the answer is just zap the whole lot of them and send them back to Russia. But this fear of escalation has dogged us all the way through. And Putin's played upon it.
Indeed, that's something we've heard a lot from our Ukraine guests, the psychological dynamic to this warfare. Do you think with the benefit of hindsight, you'd say that there should have been boots on the ground? Ukraine's allies should have sent in soldiers?
Well, I did suggest that right at the outset. So in my case, I would argue it was not with the benefit of hindsight, is what I thought at the time we needed to do. But it was clearly going to be a very, very tricky, potentially very dangerous move to have made by the United Kingdom and our allies. So we certainly couldn't have done it on our own. But belatedly, everybody now is saying that Russia must not be allowed to succeed. Now, if they'd said that right at the outset, taken action immediately, imposed all the sanctions immediately, cut off the oil supply, and delivered the weapons, it might have been a different story. But dribbling out support as we have done over the past 2.5 years has not been in our best interest. But even now, if we can supply the equipment that President Zelensky has asked for, we should do so. Meanwhile, we need to ramp up our own military production in the United Kingdom, across NATO, and in the United States too.
So just to pick up on what you've been saying, Sir Gerald, you'd sort of put this reluctance in the early days down to one thing, notably fear.
Yes, it was fear that it would cause escalation and that Russia would do goodness knows what. And all we have seen is escalation, but escalation by Russia. And now we have Putin saying that Biden is prolonging the war. Hold on, Mr. Putin. You didn't say this was a war. You said this was a special military operation. You are a liar. You are also arraigned before the International Criminal Court. There is a warrant out for your arrest. You have been abducting children, apparently in your own presidential aeroplanes, from Ukraine to Russia to Russify them. You are a rogue state, and you need to be dealt with as rogue states need to be dealt with. And very significantly, we've just heard this morning from the new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who said that Russia and China have tried to destabilize nations with acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, disinformation, and blackmail to intimidate us. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, these are disturbing the entire world order. And we need to understand that unless we nip this in the bud, we are going to be back to where we were in the 1930s. And this is a very, very serious risk. And constantly being concerned, oh, we mustn't escalate. It is our failure. It is our fear of escalation by us that has resulted in the escalation by Russia of their unacceptable, disgusting brutality. And we simply have to stop it. If we do not stop it, imagine what the consequences will be. Who will be next? Because make no mistake about it, if Russia is allowed to keep some of the land that they have bombarded and stolen, whose people they have destroyed, whose buildings they have destroyed, do not imagine they are going to stop there. And you've heard today that the Kremlin has said that if NATO agrees to allow Ukraine to cede land to Russia and maintain and join NATO for what remains of Ukraine, the Kremlin would not accept that. These are nasty, nasty, brutal people, and they are liars. Their word cannot be trusted.
And yet, Sir Gerald, the British Prime Minister seems to be conceding to the fact that there should be and there will be a negotiated end to this conflict. Should Ukraine's allies, in your opinion, sit down at the negotiating table and negotiate with Vladimir Putin, given what you've just said about him?
Absolutely no way whatsoever. As I said right at the outset, the only people who are authorized, who have the right to cede part of their sovereign territory to another state are the people of Ukraine. If that is to happen, it must be a decision for them, and it is not our business either to advise them so to do, let alone to negotiate on their behalf with a brutal, repressive regime like that which operates in Moscow.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said about the Budapest Memorandum, because some of our viewers might not remember the significance of it. As you say, it's a nearly 30-year-old agreement, and it was intended, correct me if I'm wrong, to protect Ukraine in precisely the type of situation in which Ukraine finds itself today. Do you think, therefore, that this agreement is dead in the water?
Oh, clearly it's been dead in the water since the 22nd of February 2022, when Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine. His forebear, his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, was a signatory to that agreement. Therefore, Russia was bound by that agreement, as were the United Kingdom, the United States, and Ukraine. And it's a very simple question. Would Russia have invaded Ukraine had it still had the nuclear weapons which it gave up in response to the Budapest Memorandum? Of course not. Any more than Russia is going to attack the United States or attack the United Kingdom, because we have nuclear weapons. We have the targeting arrangements on Russia, and therefore we would retaliate immediately if they were to launch any kind of nuclear strike on any of us. So that's why Putin is not going to do it. So the Budapest Memorandum, of course, is rather important for your viewers. You're absolutely right. Your viewers do need to understand that it wasn't a guarantee of the security of Ukraine by Russia, Britain, and the United States. It was an agreement to respect the sovereignty, independence, and existing borders. And how you interpret that word respect, of course, is challenging. The agreement does, it's only a page and a half long, does provide for any disputes to be referred to the United Nations, but we've seen that that's been completely worthless. So it brings us back to, well, what did we mean by respect in this regard? And I have discussed it with former Prime Minister John Major when I was chairman of the All-Party Ukraine group in the United Kingdom Parliament. And I don't think that he had any clear idea, any more than I do, as to exactly what respect means. But in my personal view, it was very clear that in exchange for giving up all those nuclear weapons, and they were about the third largest arsenal in the world of such horrendous weapons, we, the signatories, Russia, United States, the United Kingdom, agreed that Ukraine was a sovereign country, that its borders should be respected, and that's all been breached. And therefore, the United Nations being useless at doing anything about it, we are trying to do something about it. And I think that if, I repeat, we should be under no illusions whatever. If Putin is allowed to keep the land that he has stolen, he will regard that as a victory, albeit not the victory intended, because he intended to take the whole of Ukraine. He will still regard it and proclaim it as a victory. And then he will be emboldened to take action elsewhere. And we will be faced with a similar problem. And we will say to ourselves, well, we mustn't escalate. And the man who will escalate will be Russia, will be Putin. Serious times. And I hope your viewers out there in the Gulf do understand just how serious it is for them as well. Because if Russia, as a rogue state, is emboldened, so will Iran be emboldened, although Iran has been seriously damaged by Israel and by the failure of its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to destroy Israel. Nevertheless, do understand that they will be emboldened if Russia succeeds.
Given what you were just saying about the Budapest Memorandum, given what you've said about the weaponry coming so late in the day and the hesitancy that we've seen from Ukraine's allies, you paint the picture that really Ukraine has been let down quite badly by its Western allies. Is that a correct assessment of what your take is on the situation? Yes,
I suppose the simple answer has to be yes, albeit that I do think that the whole of the West eventually came round to understanding the importance of supporting Ukraine, and to a greater or lesser extent, sovereign nations, particularly NATO members, have come to their aid. We've also, of course, provided refuge for many displaced Ukrainians who have fled the country. So I don't want to be overcritical, but this is politics, and I do want politicians to understand that if you appease an aggressor, you pay a big price. We have effectively appeased Moscow, and we are paying a price, and the Ukrainians are paying a very high price indeed. And I just feel that we should have acted more boldly and more quickly. I do salute Boris Johnson, who, in my view, took the lead on this, and without whose leadership we certainly wouldn't have had the Americans coming in and support. And I do find it astonishing that Republicans, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican in American terms, I find it very depressing that our Republican friends have been so negative towards Ukraine, and so completely failing to understand the international ramifications of their failure to support what President Biden ultimately began to do in the way of practical hardware support to Ukraine. I've expressed this view to some of my friends in Washington, one of whom said that Gerald, you need to understand they're just ignorant. And I do think that there is an element of isolationism in America. They go through periods of isolation from time to time. And there will be Americans who do not see Ukraine as being part of their business, as indeed there are people in the United Kingdom who take that view. But we come back to the Budapest Memorandum. Both the United States and the United Kingdom are signatories. And I believe that having signed that agreement, we have a duty to do whatever we can to support Ukraine. And frankly, the sooner Ukraine is in a position to join NATO, the better the security of Europe will be, because NATO threatens nobody. NATO is a defensive organization. Russia is not defensive. Russia is an offensive organization, which is why two hugely long-standing nations, which have been long-standing neutral nations, Finland and Sweden, just last year applied to join NATO because they too felt threatened by their neighbour, Russia.
Yeah, of course, talks are happening in Brussels today. The NATO allies are assembled there talking about the situation in Ukraine, and perhaps not resolute in their opinion and not speaking with one voice in terms of having Ukraine join the fold just yet. But just lastly, I mean, it's my last question to you. I just want to ask you, I mean, going back to where we started, talking about Sir Keir Starmer and what he was saying last night, and picking up on what you were saying about Donald Trump's incoming administration and Republican hesitancy towards Ukraine. How do you rate Sir Keir Starmer's chances of lobbying, whispering to Donald Trump and trying to bring him around to his way of thinking, many European nations' way of thinking on the subject of Ukraine? Do you think he'll succeed?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, one of the interesting things about Donald Trump is that one never knows quite what he's going to do next. And one imagines that actually he doesn't know what he's going to do next. But I do remember in 2016 being very concerned about his rhetoric about NATO and possible US withdrawal from NATO. And I bumped into the Prime Minister in the lobby of the House of Commons whilst we were voting on something. And she was just about to go to America to meet the new President Trump, the first overseas leader to see him. And I said to Theresa May, Prime Minister, when you go to Washington, please make it absolutely clear to President Trump that NATO is not just in the interests of the security of Europe, but it's also in the interests of the security of the United States. And Prime Minister May smiled at me and said, Gerald, I've already done it. And we saw that, in fact, he rode back from some of his rhetoric on NATO, that the United States remained a key member of NATO. But there was one change of significance resulting from Donald Trump's election as president, and that was that a number of European countries, members of NATO, stepped up their spending on defense, something that not just President Trump, but Prime Minister Cameron, when he was Prime Minister here, also called on those nations which were not spending 2% of GDP on defense should do. And that was a very positive result of the first Donald Trump presidency. And I like to think that he is a pragmatist, and when he takes office and receives the latest intelligence briefing from US intelligence people, that he will recognize that Russia is not an ally, is not a threat, is a threat, cannot be trusted, and therefore the United States must be bold. Whether it will happen or not, that remains to be seen.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. The former British Defence Minister, Sir Gerald Howarth. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, turning our attention to the situation in Syria. And after snatching Aleppo from the Syrian government, Syria's opposition forces are now approaching Hama in central Syria, seizing at least 20 towns and villages around the city during the course of the last few hours. Well, Hama is a strategic city that links Aleppo to the capital Damascus, and the province's western countryside is home to many Bashar al-Assad loyalists. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Robert S. Ford, the former and last US ambassador to Syria. Ambassador Ford, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The situation in Syria, I think it's fair to say, hasn't changed very much over the course of the last decade. That is until now, this sudden resurgence of violence. It seems to have taken a lot of people by surprise. Did you see it coming?
No, I did not see it coming, and I know very few analysts or policymakers who anticipated this offensive.
What do you think is the thinking and the calculation with regards to timing that's been taken by these anti-government forces? What's your take?
I think the Syrian armed opposition forces sensed that the Lebanese Hezbollah positions and those of allied Iranian militias who had been fighting the Syrian armed opposition, they sensed that those Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militias were weaker after the fighting in Lebanon and after a fairly steady series of Israeli Air Force attacks on their positions up in north-central Syria.
Okay, and we've had reaction from right across the world to the situation. But I just wanted to pick up on something said by Andrew Tabler, who's a senior advisor on Syria during the last Trump administration. He's now at the Washington Institute. He said the Biden administration didn't just put Syria on the back burner, they took it off the stove. You can take things off the stove all you want, but that doesn't mean they're not going to boil over. Do you agree with that assessment?
The Biden administration has not paid much attention to Syria. That is very true, although the Biden administration did leave about 1,000 American soldiers in eastern Syria, ostensibly on a mission to fight against the remnants of the Islamic State that are still present in eastern Syria. But I also have to say I differ a little bit with my friend Andrew in that I don't believe the United States can fix the Syrian crisis. I don't believe the United States by itself has the key to resolving the Syrian civil war.
Okay, they might not be able to fix it, but do you think Washington has got a preferred outcome here? And if so, what do you think it is?
I think in an ideal world, what Washington would like to see is a new government in Damascus that's moderate, that's probably a coalition of different elements of Syrian society, different Syrian communities, Kurds, Muslims, different sects and different ethnic groups. Syria is a mosaic, but Washington has no strategy for how to achieve that.
Indeed, and when you look at previous situations where there's been a change of administration in a country at the will of the West, it hasn't always worked out too well, thinking of Iraq in particular. I mean, do you think there is, for that very reason, a good deal of hesitancy about what to do next?
I think both the Trump administration before Biden and now Biden, and even going back to my time with Barack Obama's administration, the bad experiences from Iraq, from Libya, and from Afghanistan have made Washington much more reticent to involve itself in civil wars in that part of the world, and I actually think that's a good thing.
There are some analysts talking now about an eventual negotiated solution in Syria. And I just wonder what your take is on that and what you think there is to negotiate.
I don't think there'll be a negotiated solution to the Syrian civil war anytime soon. I have seen no evidence over the last 13 years of President al-Assad's government being willing to make any political compromises, any political concessions, zero. And on the other side, the Syrian armed opposition, and in particular this group spearheading the offensive south towards Damascus, it's called HTS, I sense very little flexibility from them either. So we're more likely to see some kind of a ceasefire develop over the next couple of weeks to replace the ceasefire that was established in 2020. So perhaps by the end of the year, a new ceasefire with new ceasefire lines farther south than the 2020 ceasefire line.
But I mean, the situation is evolving extremely fast, has been for the last few days, and I'm sure you're following it very closely. So what is your understanding of just what the situation is right now on the ground in Syria?
I think the Syrian armed opposition, which in the entire history of the Syrian civil war has never been united, and it's not united now in late 2024. So one part of the Syrian armed opposition, backed by Turkey, is actually moving most of its forces east to capture territory from Syrian Kurdish militias, and in particular one Syrian Kurdish militia, which in the past has helped the United States against the Islamic State. The other part of the Syrian armed opposition, led by the group I mentioned, HTS, is not driving east, it's driving south in the general direction of the capital, and has now established outposts, front lines, near the Syrian city of Hama, which is about 130 kilometers south of Syria's second largest city, Aleppo, the city that fell over the weekend.
Okay, so just for the benefit of our viewers, we've got a map I think we can bring up to show them. You've got Aleppo up there in the north. Hama is underneath that. Below that is Homs, and below that is the capital, Damascus. And just looking at that rapid progression from Aleppo to Hama, one of the other largest cities in the country, how vulnerable do you think this is all making the Syrian government look at this particular stage?
Well, definitely they look weak and they look vulnerable, but I would remind viewers of two things. Number one, the Syrian opposition, the armed opposition, is not united, as I said before, and the part of the armed opposition that is driving towards Hama and then Homs and then Damascus is not that big. It probably doesn't have more than 30 or 40,000 fighters. So I think well before they get near Damascus, if they even get past Hama, but if they were to really threaten Bashar al-Assad's hold on Damascus and probably even Homs, I think the Russians would scrape together some special operations forces, and the Iranians will assemble a force of militias from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, and flow them in to the battlefront to hold the battle line so that Assad's control over Damascus, in particular, and probably Homs, remains secure.
Yeah, you mentioned those Iraqi fighters that are helping the Syrian government. I mean, just give us a sense of who's on the battlefield that we should be looking out for. Anything striking about who's there, and perhaps more interestingly, who's not there at this stage?
Well, what strikes me as particularly interesting right now is that the Russian Air Force, which really helped turn the tide the last time Bashar al-Assad's defensive lines were crumbling. Now, that was back in 2015, 9 years ago. The Russians surged in about 36 aircraft and operated a very heavy operational set of airstrikes, sometimes 30 or 40 a day, to stop the armed opposition advance back then in 2015. The Russian Air Force is not undertaking the same level of air operations now, and I think they have some fewer aircraft, and they certainly don't have as many men on the ground either. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah from Lebanon was fighting in 2015 and also has really been a key ally on the ground for Syria's Bashar al-Assad, but they were bloodied badly in Lebanon. And so they're really not in strength like they were, say, 5, 6, 9 years ago. And so that's why you have seen Assad's forces have to fall back, plus the element of surprise, and I think they were caught by surprise.
Just looking at the new administration in Washington coming to power in less than 2 months from now, one of Donald Trump's nominees is the intelligence chief designate Tulsi Gabbard. And in the past, just reading between the lines, she sounded somewhat sympathetic to President Bashar al-Assad. I don't know if you agree with that, and what you think that perhaps indicates to us about what the next administration might have planned or might have by way of desired outcome in Syria.
Well, first, it's too early to know. And second, the final decisions on especially American military involvement will go to Donald Trump. But I think useful for viewers to understand is that the Donald Trump administration will actually be composed of two different camps. There's a camp that really does not want to get involved in Syria, wants to get American military forces out of large parts of the Middle East. I wouldn't call them isolationists, but they certainly want the United States to exercise great restraint. And Tulsi Gabbard, whom you just mentioned, would fall in that camp. She will be working in the intelligence community if confirmed by the American Senate. Then you have a different camp, which is a more conservative foreign policy group that wants to resist Iranian influence in the Middle East, wants to reduce Iranian influence in the Middle East, and thinks that the United States needs to do more against Iran in places like Syria and Iraq. How Donald Trump comes out between these two camps is the key question. The only thing I know for certain is that Donald Trump wanted to withdraw completely from Syria in 2019, and Pentagon generals and State Department diplomats talked him out of it. But at the time, he called Syria nothing but a land of sand and death. I don't know if he's changed his mind.
Okay, and obviously, this is the last question to you. I mean, do you think that one way or another, we're looking at perhaps the beginnings of the end of what has been a 13-year-long conflict in Syria, or do you think we're perhaps looking at the beginning of a whole new chapter? What's your hunch?
My sense is that we will get another ceasefire probably in the next several weeks. And so it's difficult to say that Bashar al-Assad's government is going to fall or that he is going to leave power. That I do not see in the cards. And I think the Russians and the Iranians will do what it takes to keep him there. But the Syrian government and the Syrian state institutions, including the military, are steadily eroding and becoming weaker. There's a dynamic there, which I don't think the Russians and the Iranians can control. But what comes after Assad, that's also very opaque. And remember, there is no united Syrian opposition leadership, and that does not portend for a simple transfer of power.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Ambassador Robert S. Ford, thank you for speaking to Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Mick Mulroy, who is the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and the Pentagon's former top policy official for the Middle East, who joins us now from Montana in the US. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, sir. Just before we crossed you, we spoke to the last US ambassador to Damascus, Ambassador Ford, and we asked him whether this sudden resurgence of violence had taken him by surprise, whether he'd seen it coming. He said he hadn't seen it coming. Had you?
It's good to be with you, Tom, and your audience. I think that's fair with most people that even follow this very closely. They didn't expect this level of collapse of the regime at the hands of the rebels. Looking back, hindsight gives you perfect vision, but there was some indicators that it could, and that is, of course, that the Assad regime is propped up by the Russians, the Iranians, and then in large part from troops on the ground, Hezbollah, all of which are involved in their own conflict. And Hezbollah has actually pulled a lot of their forces back from places like Aleppo and throughout the Idlib province because of the Israeli invasion into southern Lebanon. So in hindsight, it does look like this could have happened, but I do think it caught most people, even analysts that follow this area, by surprise.
Okay, so I'm sure, like lots of other people in the United States, you are keeping a close eye on the situation in Syria. What do you think Washington's desired outcome is in this situation?
So it is very difficult. So in the past, we've had a policy of regime change. That was obviously changed. It is important to point out the Assad regime is responsible for hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths in this civil war. But there's also an issue of stability and who would take over in the event, which I still think is unlikely, that there is a complete collapse of the regime. This is, of course, multiple different groups, HTS leading the way. That essentially came from an al-Qaeda-linked group, al-Nusra, the leadership. They've pulled a bit away from that ideology, but certainly is somewhat extreme. And a lot of these groups are supported by Turkey. I don't know that Turkey would have really wanted this to happen in the way it did, because it could also cause major influxes of refugees into Turkey. So I think the countries are all going to get together and try to determine what is the best outcome from the region, hopefully. And hopefully Assad, if that is, that he remains at the current time, is willing to negotiate with all the groups going forward. If not, then he's really going to have to rely on Russia fully committing to regime preservation in Syria.
Okay, so do you think it's looking more likely that we're heading down the route of further military action and a raising of the temperature in terms of the situation on the battlefield? Or do you think it's more likely we'll go down that other road that you just alluded to there, some sort of a negotiated settlement?
Well, I think, one of the issues is if this rebel group continues to push and doesn't have a lot of resistance, then, of course, they'll have less, I think, desire to enter some kind of negotiations. I mean, it's just how things work, particularly in that country at this time. So if Assad can't put up at least somewhat of a resistance to stalemate this successfully, then that makes the negotiations less likely. So we'll have to see in the coming days just what happens, whether Russia will fully come in, whether Hezbollah will redeploy forces to assist them, and of course, whether Iran will get more involved. A positive, of course, when it comes to the anti-Iran crowd is if Assad is removed, then that Shia corridor, as they called it, that can ship weapons into Hezbollah is compromised. But again, it's unclear of what would happen if the Assad regime is thrown out.
And what do you think we might see by way of a shift in approach towards Damascus with the incoming administration in Washington? Of course, I'm talking about Donald Trump's return to the White House.
Well, that is a good question, because they have been, I would say, if on comparison to the Biden administration, the past Trump administration was very strong against Iran. And that's likely going to continue as Iran has caused so much of the issues going on in the Middle East. They are getting closer to a nuclear weapon. And of course, there's media reports that they've even had plots to kill the incoming president. So if you look at it that way, in Assad being somewhat of a client state of Iran, then this could be bad or good for the anti-Assad forces. I do think that, of course, ultimately, foreign policy has to deal with pragmatism as well. They have to determine just what would replace him if something in this coalition would be the case, and then would that be better for our interests and the interests of the region? So there's a lot of unknown questions right now, but I do think the incoming Trump administration would be even more hard on Iran than the current Biden administration is.
The ambassador we were just speaking to, Robert Ford, the last US ambassador to Damascus, do you think it's right that the United States decided to pull out its diplomatic presence from Damascus? Or do you think they should have perhaps thought more recently about perhaps reinstating a diplomatic presence in the form of an ambassador, as some countries have started doing? And the most notable example I can think of is Italy, which has decided in the last couple of years to reinstate an ambassador to Damascus. What do you think the United States should have done?
So this is a tough call. I mean, we talked already a bit about just how brutal this regime of Bashar al-Assad is. And we did, of course, had a regime change policy. Of course, the United States does have ways to have diplomatic relations with them through partner countries and even through the intelligence services at times. I do think it's something that has to be constantly assessed to determine whether it is still in our interest not to have direct contact. That's shifting the diplomacy from, again, third parties, third countries, or the intelligence service to an official relationship. But that would probably have to be also somewhat of an acknowledgement that this regime is going to say. So that decision now from the incoming administration will have to be looked at from those regards.
Okay, and just lastly, I put the same question to Ambassador Ford. I'd just like to ask for your thoughts, your predictions. I know it's very difficult to predict where things are heading, especially in a situation that's moving as fast as this one and that took everyone, as we've been saying, by surprise. But what do you think is the likely next stage, and what sort of an end game might we be looking at here?
I would look very closely at Turkey. Most of the support that goes to these rebel groups comes through Turkey, and they can cut it off. And if they, and I do believe that they think this is destabilizing, as it could shove millions more people into Turkey, then they can have a lot of leverage on HTS and the other groups. They can simply say, we'll cut you off. So if that is the case, I do think this will end with some kind of negotiated, say, diplomatic way ahead. It'll still be tense, but this is something that happens when you have groups that are solely reliable on third countries like Turkey and this rebel group. So I do think this will stop before there's a full regime change in Damascus.
All right. Well, thank you very much, indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Mick Milroy, thank you for speaking to us on Al Arabiya News. Now, in other news, already reeling from their November election defeat, the US Democratic Party is now grappling with President Joe Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter, for federal crimes. Well, some have called the move misguided and unwise. Others have gone further, saying it sets a dangerous precedent. Well, the incoming president, Donald Trump, has said that he is considering pardoning the rioters who attacked the Capitol on the 6th of January 3 years ago. Well, for more analysis, we're joined now by Richard Painter, former chief White House ethics lawyer in the administration of George W. Bush, who joins us now from St. Paul, Minnesota. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. In your opinion, was this the wrong decision by President Biden?
I do not fault President Biden for wanting to pardon his own son. The president has the power under the U.S. Constitution to pardon anybody, and this is fully understandable. What I strongly disagree with is President Biden's statement that he issued yesterday saying that the prosecution was unfair and was politically motivated. This was a prosecution undertaken by an independent prosecutor appointed by the United States Department of Justice, which has been supervised for 4 years by Attorney General Merrick Garland, who was appointed by President Biden himself. And we've had multiple prosecutions of high-profile figures, not just Hunter Biden, but of course President-elect Trump, in 2 cases brought by the Department of Justice. And President-elect Trump is saying that those prosecutions were politically motivated, which I also do not think is true. It does not help for President Biden to be undermining his own Justice Department and the independent prosecutors who've been appointed pursuant to the Department of Justice regulations. Hunter Biden was duly convicted of crimes. These are not heinous crimes that probably wouldn't result in jail time. I fully understand the pardon of his own son, but the attacks on the Department of Justice are not justified and will encourage more attacks next year by the incoming administration, attacks against career prosecutors, political attacks, and I just don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, of course, President Biden pledged that he wasn't going to do this, and then he changed his mind. And I'm just wondering what you think has got people so angry, because let's be clear, this story isn't going away. People are furious about this in the United States. Do you think people are angriest about the fact that President Biden went back on a promise, or do you think they're angriest about the fact that he's decided to pardon his own son?
Well, presidents make campaign promises and then break those promises over and over again. I don't think this was a credible campaign promise. I never believed it. I wish the Biden White House had not kept repeating it. They simply should have said no comment on the Hunter Biden case, and that would have been good enough. So I wish they hadn't been talking about it so much. But yes, presidents do break campaign promises, and clearly President Biden did this here. But he's trying to explain his way out of that by attacking the prosecution, attacking the Justice Department, and the integrity of the independent counsel was a serious mistake. The claims the president is making about the independent counsel are not accurate, and this just feeds the flames of animosity toward the Justice Department from the political right. And those claims, of course, those allegations will accelerate when Donald Trump takes office. We need an independent Department of Justice where the president is not pressuring the Department of Justice, where the president is not attacking prosecutors, tweeting at prosecutors, that type of thing. We saw it in the first Trump term, and I'm very disappointed that President Biden has used a little bit of the same playbook involving the case, the Hunter Biden case. I wish he'd just simply issued the pardon, no comment, move on.
Yeah, the New York Times has got an argument as to why he changed his mind, and I wonder whether you could help me understand it. They say that the ongoing pressure of these legal trials could have some impact on Hunter Biden's mental well-being, his sobriety. I mean, do you think there's much sympathy in the American public for the situation the president found himself in and this risk, according to the New York Times, that his son's health could deteriorate as a result?
Well, I believe there's some sympathy. His son, Hunter, has had serious issues with substance abuse and other issues over many decades. And once again, I think that everyone would understand why a father who has the power to pardon a son in this situation would do it. But as the Biden administration digs in explaining why the president did it, the explanations that attack the integrity of the prosecution team, the integrity of the Department of Justice, are very, very dangerous, particularly with the incoming administration being supported by quite a few people who have been openly hostile to the Department of Justice and the FBI. So I wish that President Biden would adhere to his oath of office to uphold the law by supporting his Justice Department, grant the pardon to his son. He did that. I'm not complaining about that. But he should not be attacking our justice system, which is fair, was fair to Hunter Biden, and was fair to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that this is, in some respect, a gift to the incoming Trump administration. And in fact, a spokesperson for Donald Trump, Stephen Chung, says that this shows that the system of justice must be fixed and due process must be restored for all Americans, which is exactly what President Trump will do as soon as he returns to the White House with an overwhelming mandate from the American people. I mean, it sounds like this is indeed, as you're saying, a gift to the incoming administration.
Well, this certainly feeds the flames. We've always had people who attack the integrity of the justice system, and there are problems with prosecutorial systems like every other system, but our system of independent prosecutors being appointed by the Department of Justice has worked. Our independent counsel law worked for 20 years. We had independent counsels who reported to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, but it was the Democrats who attacked that system when Ken Starr prosecuted Bill Clinton for perjury, and that we don't have an independent counsel law anymore. But we have the system of appointed independent special prosecutors through the Justice Department. But I don't think these are partisan attacks on prosecutors simply for doing their jobs help. Whether it was attacks on Ken Starr in the 1990s, the attacks Hunter Biden, the attacks of President Biden has launched against the prosecution team in Delaware in the Hunter Biden case, or the repeated attacks on the Department of Justice and the FBI by numerous people associated with the incoming Trump administration, including at times the president-elect himself. This is very, very dangerous, this rhetoric that somehow prosecutions are politicized. So the answer is for the President of the United States to take over the Justice Department and politicize everything that much more and start pursuing his political enemies. And that's the type of rhetoric we're dealing with right now. And I think what President Biden said yesterday will only encourage that.
Yeah, so this idea of public trust in the Department of Justice being sort of undermined by decisions like this is something we've been hearing quite a lot. And you know, this idea, perhaps in some people's mind, that here is the President of the United States putting his family before the country. I mean, how does all of this look, do you think, to the average American?
Well, this situation does not look good at all. Let's remember that President Biden, the Justice Department did not appoint an independent prosecutor in the Donald Trump cases until almost 2 years into President Biden's term. And that's the reason those cases were so late being filed, and they simply ran out of time. President-elect Trump ran out the clock on those cases. President Biden was hostile to independent prosecutors from day one. Part of that may have been the problems that Hunter Biden has, or the problems that President Biden himself had with classified documents that he removed when he was vice president and stored at an office run by the University of Pennsylvania, where he just simply forgot about them. But the Biden administration has not been supportive of independent prosecutors and appointing independent prosecutors promptly in these cases. And I think that's part of the reason we are where we are today. An independent prosecutor should have been appointed to deal with January 6th and with Hunter Biden on January 20 of 2021. And these cases were allowed to drag on and on, in part because of the Biden administration's refusal to support the notion of independent counsels.
Okay, just lastly, I mean, we've had people on this program saying that this decision has permanently tarnished the legacy of the Biden administration. Don't know if you agree with that. And just one other thought, I just want to get your opinion on this. I read something that sort of seems to sum this up quite neatly. One of the commentators said that it's a surprise that's not at all surprising, this decision by President Biden to pardon his son. What do you make of that?
It's certainly not surprising that the President of the United States would want to pardon his own son who's been convicted of felonies. And I don't blame him for that. But this administration has been tarred by ethics scandals. The president's abuse of classified information between his vice presidency and his presidency was a serious matter. The fact that he left documents in the custody of the University of Pennsylvania through late 2022 and apparently simply forgot about them was a serious matter. His relationship with the University of Pennsylvania and the Penn Biden Center, I criticize strongly, and the quid pro quo for ambassadorships. We had scandals in the Biden administration, and the most tragic scandal was the cover-up of the president's capacity to serve a second term. People close to him in the White House knew that he was a one-term president. He had said he was going to run for one term and then pass the torch to the next generation. The Democratic Party should have had a primary, and Kamala Harris might very well have won that primary, but they ended up switching candidates in July with only 100 days to go. And Vice President Harris, in that scenario, really didn't stand a chance. So I don't think that the president was fair to his own country and to his party by not sticking by his most important pledge, which was that he was going to serve one term and pass the torch to the next generation. And that didn't happen.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Richard Painter, thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
That's all we've got time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Bangkok. It's the city of angels and the Venice of the East. Bangkok is one of the most visited cities in Southeast Asia. Thailand's capital city brings hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world each year. The largest and most developed city in Thailand, Bangkok offers tourists a mix of modern and upscale sights and sounds while maintaining its old charm from its historical architecture and traditions that date back to hundreds of years. One of the most famous is Wat Arun, located on the west bank of Chao Phraya River opposite the Grand Palace. This is a must-see site in Bangkok, as the architectural design is completely unique to that of other temples in Thailand's capital. You can even climb its steep 70-meter high spire, which boasts the best views of Bangkok's skyline. While it is also known as the Temple of Dawn, Wat Arun is best at night when lit up, as it gives off a golden beam of light over the Chao Phraya River. The Grand Palace is the capital's most glorified and world-renowned structure. It was once the home of the Thai king, the royal court, and the administrative seat of government, and was built back in 1782. Marvel at its ancient designs, from the diverse array of Buddhist sculptures and temples that flow through the vicinity. Most popular is the Wat Prakil, or the Temple of the Emerald Buddha. Bangkok is also well known for its busy market scene. Anchored on either side of the river are boats stocked with fresh tropical fruits and veggies, coconut juice, and local food being cooked on open grills. Also popular are the floating markets Damnon Sadwak, Ampawa, and Klong Lat Mayom. Likewise, Bangkok's mall scene is alive and kicking, with enough shops stretching from Siam along Sukhumvit Road to last a lifetime. Also within Bangkok's cosmopolitan urban jungle are the expert tailors that can be seen on almost every street. You can get a tailor-made suit together for just about a week or two at a very reasonable price. Despite the city's known busyness, Bangkok also offers experiences for rest and recluse. Massage parlors can be found all over Bangkok, offering a Thai oil massage, head, neck and back massage, foot massage, and many more. One can also opt for a nature respite from the sprawling concrete jungle nearby within the city. It is known for its lush tropical trees, lakes, and raised embankments that pass unique houses on stilts built along the Chao Phraya River's edge.
Irene, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya. I want to kick off by asking you to sort of walk me through how you view your role within NATO, because women today are under pressure in various parts of the world and, frankly, in the West.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to have this moment of exchange about a very important topic, not only women in NATO, but I would say on women across the globe and about our rights and the general pushback, I would say, that we are facing today. The role I have at NATO, I'm the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, is not new. I'm the fourth Special Representative. The position was established in 2012. But after 12 years, I have to say that despite the progress that we have made within the alliance, there is still much to do. Of course, the work I do within NATO is around the mandate of the alliance. So it's specific about the role of women and peace and security. So we do not cover other issues. But of course, what we do contributes to advancing gender equality. And it is also stated in our latest strategic concept, endorsed in Madrid in 2022, that advancing gender equality is a reflection of the common values of the alliance. So what I do is really to look at everything that the alliance does to make sure that gender perspectives are included. What does this mean? It means that every time we take a decision, both at political and a military level, we have to make sure that we consider the diversity of the population. Population is made by half by men and the other half by women, so we cannot take decision without considering that security is perceived in a different way by men and women.
No doubt. How concerned are you when you see President-elect Trump's pick for defense saying that women shouldn't be in combat roles?
This is a topic that has been discussed over the decades around the globe. The hope was that we had overcome the barriers, the cultural barriers. Certainly, we have overcome the legal barriers. So everywhere across allies and also in our partners countries, women are part of the armed forces. In different extents, I would say across NATO allies, we have an average of 12%. So if we look at the population, as I said, 50% made by women, there is still a big gap to cover this percentage. I think that we still have a lot of work to overcome cultural barriers and change the mindset. We are not all at the same stage. So this conversation will certainly be put at the table, but there is a general consensus that women have to be part of the military forces. And we have proof that nowadays, if we look at Ukraine, how incredible women are fighting now on the front line. Since the full-scale invasion, a lot of women have joined voluntarily, and that's very important to say, that they were not obliged to do it. They are around 60,000 now in the armed forces. More than 40,000 are civilians, but the rest are military, and 5,000 are fighting on the front line alongside with their male colleagues.
If the United States rolls back women's role in the military, and I mean in combat positions, does that weaken the NATO alliance and the NATO mission?
I'm not expecting this change to happen. Of course, I'm expecting maybe some conversation around this, but there is a consensus. There are policies in place. This year, in Washington, D.C., and our big yearly summit, we endorse a new women, peace, and security policy. When we endorse a policy, 32 allies come together and they agree on what is on the policy.
Including the United States.
Including.
Yeah.
Indeed, and this lasts for 5 years. And the policy states very clearly that increasing participation of women in all peace and security efforts, both on the diplomatic and in the military side, is what we have to do if we want to enhance our operational effectiveness. Yeah. And this is where my work leads, to the implementation of this policy that will be translated next year in a new action plan. We are working on it. And this is where I will concentrate my efforts.
Yeah. Talk to me about this. You mentioned Ukraine and the role of women there in combat positions that they've taken on as an act of necessity. There's a lot of conversation, of course, about how that war may come to a conclusion. In your mind, are women better prepared to take on roles not just in the military now, but also in government in Ukraine?
I think as historically we have seen how wars change the role of women within the society. They open up different possibilities because men go to the front line. In this case, the front line is both physical and also on the space, because we see the war in Ukraine played on the hybrid space and cybersecurity, but also with very old technique on the front line. Women have filled the position in Ukraine as they did in the past during the First World War and Second World War. We see incredible women in politics at governmental level. We see women on the front line and covering all roles in the society. Even in the defense industry recently, women have stepped up and take more positions. So I think this has worked as an accelerator for the society, and I expect that women will continue to play an important role in the resolution of the conflict and in the post-conflict, where we hope a just peace will happen soon, and we will see women to continue to take their important position.
When are we going to see a NATO Secretary General who is a woman? Because I know that was something that was mooted at the time, at the last round of conversations about this.
There was a lot of conversation about this. We need to find the best candidates. I will always say there are some requirements, and requirements are that the Secretary General has to be a former Prime Minister or a President. And this is where the conversation has to be broader.
Yes.
Because the point is, why don't we have more women in politics covering this position? Because automatically then we could have more candidates for the position of the Secretary General. So now we have just welcomed our new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but as you might heard, this week he announced a Deputy Secretary General, who is a woman and from North Macedonia, and she will join us in supposedly a few weeks. And she's the second one in the history, so it's already a progress. And I think maybe next one could be.
Could it be Giorgia Meloni?
She's read in my mind, because the conversation we had It's also about the South and the rotation. In alliance,
Exactly.
we're trying to rotate, and sometimes, we see a tendency to have a Secretary General coming from the northern countries, and there was a conversation about the South, but the requirements didn't come together. So one option could be to change the requirements, and the other is to see more prime minister in the South. So, of course, Giorgia Meloni could be a candidate in the future.
Walk me through this. Today, the rest of this region continues to reel over what we've seen happen in Afghanistan, and I'm talking about the subjugation of women and girls. Obviously, that was an area of serious concern for NATO, and when coalition forces were there. In your mind, what is the responsibility of NATO today to those women that we promised a future and then abandoned?
That's a difficult conversation to take. You know that NATO operates under mandates, and when we operate out of our area of responsibility, we do based on resolution of the United Nations Security Council. We withdraw, the mission is over. So as an alliance, we do no longer have a responsibility there collectively because we are no longer present. But of course, allies, individually and bilaterally and in different contexts such as...
And as human
Nations.
beings.
Yes, and they continue to provide support. The situation is very worrisome. There are no words to describe what happened. And I think that individually, as I said, a human being and with our respective roles at national level, we have to continue to speak out about what is happening there and to fight for women's rights, because the silence will really put them, in a we will forgive about them, even if we don't do. But in the global conversation, you see, if you read the newspaper, it doesn't really come on the news so often.
What do you think is the solution there in your mind? Because obviously there is an ability of nations who are giving aid to Afghanistan to exert pressure on them.
If I could have a solution, I would try to put this, implement it. I found that extremely difficult. What I'm doing on my side is to continue dialogue with women from Afghan and see if there is a way to support. One of the focus is always how to train women to create space for dialogue for them in terms of dialogue also with the Taliban or mediation processes. And I know that there are several women who are also present in Doha a few years ago that continue the dialogue and try also to train younger generation to make sure that they will have the possibility to play a role and to exercise their rights.
When you come to a forum like this one, based in the United Emirates, a country that has promoted women, not just to positions in government, also mandated their participation on boards in the private sector, are you encouraged by what you see and how the region is evolving?
Indeed, I am very much. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to engage in person, because I think this is the best way when then you have a concrete example that you can share. When people ask me, what do you do? It's difficult to explain then if you don't have stories to tell. And changing the narrative is what we absolutely have to do. So it's a very positive example, and I'm really looking forward to attending the forum tomorrow.
Tell me this, what is missing in your mind from the global dialogue for women? Because when we speak about this from a business perspective, we talk about quotas and we talk about a number of women on boards. One woman feels alone, 2 women has a friend, and then 3 women can make a change. But in your mind, from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, what needs to change?
I think it's a question of the cultural change I was mentioning earlier. And it's about gender, what we call gender-responsive leadership. We focus a lot on the participation of women, but we still find resistance, cultural barriers. And sometimes women are there because government decide to do, and then speak at global level, not referring to the local situation. But at the end, there is no real willingness to integrate. So it's more a token than a reality. So I think that what we have to look is the change of mindset of who is in power today, which in the normality are men. So we have to look into what we call the gender-responsive leadership to say that to train, to dialogue with both men and women together to understand the benefit that the entire society will have if women take on more position at high level. It's not for women, it's not helping women to do something, when they say, I'm helping my wife. No, it's not about this. Because in the moment where the dynamic changes, men will benefit from this different dynamic. They will have more time for the children. They have more time even for discussion and conversation, not under the pressure. And the solution that will be found will be better solution because they will really bring the perspective of the entire society. So this topic of the gender responsive leadership is something I advocated for and I put as a first goal of the new policy at NATO, because I think that in a male-dominated environment, while we work to increase the number of women, we have also to work with the men who are present to make sure that we can reach the same high-quality solution in a shorter time.
Bring them with us.
Yes.
Irene, it's great to have you here at Al Arabiya. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers,